All right, how's it going everyone? So in this video, I'm going to be building out a speed dating prototype using a couple of cool technologies. I'm basically using the T3 stack, which consists of Tailwind CSS, Prisma, TypeScript, Next.js, React. And for the speed dating app, we actually have webcam and audio communication between different tabs, and I'm using the Agora API for achieving that. So I do want to say that this video is sponsored by Agora, and I'm going to be showing you how to build out a cool little speed dating app using the Agora platform. Really cool SDK, really quick to kind of get stuff integrated between different users using their browser, using WebRTC. So check it out, and then also check out the description for links for any of the things I talk about in this video. Hopefully you guys can learn something cool from this. But first, let me just go ahead and demo like real quick what I'm going to be building for you live. And I do want to say this is like a live coding session, so everything I do is like off the top of my head. I have a really basic goal or plan that I'm trying to follow, but a lot of this stuff is just on the fly. So we're going to run into bugs, we're going to waste time, and we're going to just solve stuff together, I guess. So we have two tabs open here, and I'm going to go ahead and type in like a Bob for a person who wants to join the speed dating app. And over here, they can type in like a phone number or an email or like a WhatsApp link or something. So basically, I want the app to be able to be like kind of anonymous, but also if you do like someone that you meet on the app, you can kind of have like a quick little link or contact info you can share with somebody else. So I'm going to go ahead and type in Bob and click join session. And when I do that, it actually sits to a new page waiting for other users to connect the speed dating application. And we have all this stuff kind of stored locally in Prisma. Bob is created over here in a database record, and it says that he's waiting for more people. So let's go ahead and go back to this tab. I'm going to type in Jane, and I'll type in like a different number or a link or whatever. I'll just do example.com. How about that? And I'm also going to join the session. So the moment the application sees that two people are kind of waiting, it's going to connect them together. And now I actually have a webcam connected with Jane and Bob over here. And it just turns out it's the same webcam. But if you had multiple computers, or if I had another computer, it would be that computer connecting to this computer that I'm talking with. And you have like a countdown timer that starts at 20 seconds, but I could bump that up to something higher in the future. But I wanted to keep it low so I can kind of prototype this and get some feedback quicker. So now that both users are done, we're redirected to a done page. I can go and I can see the status of those users. They're both kind of in a status of chatting, just to prevent them from ever being connected again with other users. And then also we have the match information. So when did this match end? What users were matched together? Did they like each other or not? Okay, so now we have a page where you can kind of rate the person that you were matched with. And if you both happen to like each other, it's actually going to share that contact information with each other. So I'm going to go ahead and click like for this person, and I'm going to click like for this person. And after a couple of seconds, it's going to sync up with the database, and we are going to see the contact information for who you are having a speed date with. Okay, so if it's a link to a Facebook page or a link to a WhatsApp messenger, or if it's a link to a phone number, you can see that and you can kind of write that down if you do want to continue talking to that person that you enjoy talking to with the speed dating application. And then at that point, you can just go back to the waiting room. It's going to wait for someone else to connect you with. So if I go ahead and go back and type in like Sally and go ahead and type in like 444, I should have Sally connected with Bob over here. And now they can do some chatting sessions as well. And after about 20 seconds, the same thing. We can show a like button, show a dislike button. And I'm going to show you the last flow. If one user happens to dislike the other user, we're going to kind of see what happens there. All right, so let's say this person did not like the other person. I'm going to sit here waiting for the other person to respond. And this person, maybe they did like the other person, so I'll put like. And then at some point, these UIs are going to sync up, and it just basically shows you a button, go to waiting room. Okay, so you can go back and you can start doing another speed date round or speed date session with someone else. So that's what we're going to be building in this video. I hope you guys stick around and maybe learn something. Again, this is a live coding session, so there's going to be points in this video where maybe I'm not fully focused in on exactly what we're trying to do, but I do try my best to kind of explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, and we will figure out bugs together in this live stream session. All right, so before we actually jump into code for this project, I do want to kind of mock out like what we're going to be building, because I don't want to go into this completely blind in a sense. So let's first start with like a page, right? We want to start with like a landing page. And for someone to do a speed dating app, like obviously you probably need to input some type of name. So we probably want like a name input and then probably some type of submit button. And as I think about this more, like the idea is once you've connected with someone with your webcam and you've talked to them in your microphone, you want to kind of keep track of who you liked and who you didn't like, right? So maybe more than a name might be useful for tracking here. I'm just going to go ahead and make a join button here like this. And I think it would probably make more sense to have some type of contact. Now, I don't know if we want to do like a phone number or like an email or some type of handler. For now, let's just keep this really basic, right? So I'm going to say contact, and you can put whatever you want here. This could be like a URL to your Facebook. This could be a phone number if you want to. I'll just put contact info. I'll say Facebook link, phone number, email, etc. And so the idea is after you've done your like speed date session and you actually do like someone, like how do you actually come back and get in contact with them? So obviously you can put whatever you want here, whatever the person feels most comfortable sharing, they can put into that contact info. And once they click join, it probably makes sense to go to some type of like waiting room, right? So you have to wait for other people to join the app. So waiting for others. Okay, so some type of waiting, maybe a spinner or something. Don't really know, but behind the scene, like what does this component need to do, or what does this page need to do? Wait until you find someone else to join a room with. Okay, and this should all be kind of random. Like it shouldn't actually like allow you to pick who you're talking with, because that kind of defeats the purpose of like a speed date. You don't know who you're about to get into a chat room with and discuss things with. So we could maybe have some like placeholder text here if that would help. Just kind of explain like why they're waiting. Maybe we can even put like how many people are online, like 12 people online. And we have like how many rooms currently in session. I don't know how intense we want to make this, but 12 people online, 4 sessions in progress, right? So that would mean that like there's 8 people who are currently chatting with each other because it's like a one-on-one conversation. And there's other people actually like waiting to join. So we'll have to figure out like how this is going to work behind the scenes. Maybe this can query a database and just try to connect you with someone who is also waiting. But once you've been connected to someone, I'm gonna go ahead and say like after clicking join here, so we kind of know what's going on. And then after that, when you've actually connected with someone, so connected with another user, we probably want to keep track of who we're talking to because we don't want to keep on getting reconnected to the same user. So I'll put a little like offshoot arrow to maybe like a database or the backend. Let's see if we can find like a database here, just so we can kind of like engineer this and design this. So I'll say like 3, keep track of who I had a session with. And I don't know if I want to do this here at this point or if I can do it at a later point, like when you finally finish the session. Because what if you're chatting with somebody and then after 2 minutes, your session gets disconnected, right? So technically, like you don't want the system to think that you're finished talking with that person, but I don't know how involved we're going to make this. So it's probably going to be really basic. But keep track of who you just had a session with or who you're connected with. And then finally, like we probably want to display. Don't know if we want it top to bottom or left to right. Probably do something like this, and you know, we'll have let me put like a picture of some people here. So this will be a user, like, you know, you'll actually be talking face to face with a webcam with somebody. And you'll probably have some type of timer. So like, I don't know, I'll put like 4:20 minutes or time remaining. How about that? So you have like that much time remaining. Maybe if you want to make it really fancy, we could have like a loading bar here that kind of decrements down as time is progressing. So you're kind of like aware that like, okay, I need to either exchange contact information with this person or I need to like, I don't know. But I don't want to have users to be able to like skip. Like you actually need to give people a solid chance. Hopefully there's actually like real people on this application and not trolls, because you don't want to be stuck in a room for 5 minutes chatting with someone who's just like doing stuff that you probably don't want to see on camera. So let's just go ahead and like make do we want a button here? Maybe we will have a button that just says in session. Maybe like someone is just so, you just can't stand that person and you know that nothing's ever going to work out with that person. So let's just go ahead and like end the session. Okay, we'll have a button there. All right. And once your time is kind of elapsed, you probably want to go back to the waiting room. Actually, before you go back to the waiting room, maybe we'll go to another page, and that page could be like, I don't know, do you like the person or not? Maybe, I don't know. You could have like maybe a like button or dislike button. So the idea is if you like the person or dislike them, when you like the person, you want to be able to share that initial contact info with them. If you don't like them, then you won't share them. And then maybe we could say like waiting for response. And then once that other person kind of messages you back and tells you like, hey, I liked you or disliked you. And then once you've also entered your information, maybe we should go to another screen that shares the information. So we're either going to go back to the waiting room, like so, or maybe we'll show the contact info for the person. So show contact info, and then maybe we'll just go back to the waiting room. How about that? And then let's just kind of annotate this real quick. I'll just say like for disliked person disliked you. Or I could say either person disliked each other. Okay, so let's say this didn't work out and no one liked each other. Then we'll go back to the waiting room. Both people will just go straight back to the waiting room. Otherwise, I'll put both people liked each other. And then that's when you'll actually get the contact information shared with you. And then maybe we'll have a button that says like back to waiting room. How about that? Which will basically take you back to the waiting room. So this is like the overall flow of all this. It looks kind of intense, but hopefully it's not going to be as difficult to implement as I'm thinking it will be. I think the hardest part will be this page, which if I zoom in a little bit, this is actually connecting with a webcam and a microphone to someone else so you can actually chat. But it's kind of like, it looks like a giant state machine, and hopefully it won't be too hard to implement this with Next.js. It looks like it might need 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 pages. That's it. Just 5 different React or Next.js pages, and we can just slowly move the person to those different pages based on whatever. And then I think if we wanted to kind of document the underlying technical implementation details of some of this stuff, which I mean doesn't hurt to do. We should probably keep track. So I don't know, 3A, track if you liked or disliked that person. So overall, this is like kind of like what we plan to prototype out in this video, and hopefully it's not as hard as I think it's going to be. Hopefully it's easier than I think it is, but looks like a lot of work, but maybe it won't be too hard. All right, so we'll try to keep this one bookmarked or pinned so we don't like lose it, because this will be a good starting place. And I'm just going to try to implement this whole entire application just page by page, so it helps my flow. And one thing I want to say is I'm going to be using the T3 stack. This is a utility library that is kind of promoted and managed by another YouTuber / Twitch streamer called Theo. So check him out. But he has an open source community who's working on this T3 stack generator. And it basically consists of using Next.js, tRPC, Tailwind CSS, TypeScript, Prisma, and NextAuth. So those are the things that come kind of included with this. We might not be using all this. I don't know if we'll be using NextAuth, but we will be using Prisma to keep track of connections and users and names. TypeScript, you should probably always use TypeScript when you're developing web applications these days. It's just, there's too many benefits not to use TypeScript in my opinion. Tailwind CSS is a really useful atomic CSS library that you can kind of use to apply styles to your page. I really like using it. It makes you really efficient at building out pages in my opinion. tRPC is a replacement kind of for RESTful APIs. So it kind of couples your front end and your back end together with TypeScript. It's really nice to have if you just need to prototype something or just build something really basic where you have the front end and the back end all written in TypeScript. And then Next.js, obviously everyone knows what Next.js is. It's a great framework for building out full stack server-side rendered applications or client-side rendered, doesn't really matter. It's really flexible. You can do what you want with it. So let's just go ahead and create a T3 application. I'm going to copy this, and then I'm in a project called Speed Date, which I have a GitHub repo already set up. And I'm going to go ahead and just run this in this directory. And it should ask us a couple of things to kind of get started, right? It's going to prompt us with a couple of questions. What frameworks and libraries do you want to install with the T3 stack? We want TypeScript. I'm probably just going to pick all of these, honestly. And I'm going to say no, don't initialize a new repo because I'm already in one. Would you like to do an npm install? Sure. Dot already exists and is empty. How would you like to proceed? Clear the directory and continue installation, overwrite conflicting files. Let's just go ahead and try to continue installation and overwrite. Now, I don't know if that means it's going to overwrite my Git repo. It might, but we'll figure it out. All right, so once this is all set up, what you can actually do is do npx prisma migrate dev, and I believe that's going to run and create any migration scripts that we need for next auth. And I'll just say, like, I'm going to name that migration script init. And by default, the T3 stack is going to use SQLite, so we don't have to worry about like setting up a Postgres database locally or connecting to PlanetScale or doing anything like that. I'm probably going to keep this all just local because it's easier for what I'm doing in this video. But once you have that set up, you can do npm run dev. I do want to say that I am on node 16. I think there is an issue with next auth with node 18. I don't know if that's been resolved yet, but node 16 is fine. It's long-term support as well, so it's fine to be on node 16 if you want. And that's also the node version that I think Amazon Lambda supports, so it's okay. When this is all set up, and also I'm going to try to make sure I commit my stuff often. So if I show you, I have a repo called speeddate. So if you go to my Codicybert repository /speeddate, you can find this code. I'm going to go ahead and try to commit every step of the way. Every time I add a new feature or change something, I'm going to try to do small incremental commits with decently, documented messages. So I'm going to say project initialization using T3 stack. All right, let's just go ahead and push that. And now we have that code pushed up to my Git repo. Let's just run the code real quick and let's look at this. So if everything prints out or if everything renders out to the page correctly, that means we are successfully ready to go with the T3 stack and Prisma and all this other stuff. Pretty cool. I'm going to close out of that Git repo for the T3 stack and we can start working towards that initial goal of this. So with Next.js, hopefully you kind of understand Next.js, but if you're not familiar with it, the way Next.js is set up is you have this folder typically. Some people have a source folder, some people put these things at the top level. But regardless, you typically have a pages directory, and in that pages directory, you have your index file. So in the index file itself, this is where all that like create T3 stuff is printing out here, right? So we're going to actually delete a majority of this. I'm going to call this speeddate. With Next.js, you have this head component, and anything you put in this is actually going to be used for HTML title in your metadatas, right? So if I save this file and go back, you'll see that it prints out speeddate over here in the top, which is pretty cool. But let's also kind of gut all this stuff. Okay. So I'm going to keep the main here, and I'm probably going to delete a majority of this stuff. I'm going to delete this technology card stuff. We don't need any of this either. And I'll keep this React query stuff around because we might need it. No, whatever, I'll just delete it. Let's look at our design and let's try to figure out like what do we plan to do here, okay? So we need an input with a label and we also need a label with contact info. Before I get too much further, I do want to try to install a pre-existing component library because you don't want to waste all your time building components, especially like really simple ones. If you're a beginner, it's better to start with a pre-existing component library or design system so you don't spend all your time building components that many other developers have already built for you. Now the options when you're using Tailwind, there's like Daisy UI, and then you can also use like Tailwind components, and there's also headless UI as well. I'm going to try to use something called React Daisy UI, which I'm not the biggest fan of it, but it does give you a lot of functionality out of the box. But if you look at the actual like stars of this repo, it's only like 280 stars, and I have found a couple of issues that I don't like with it. But regardless, I think it's still pretty cool. And under the hood, Daisy UI is an interesting little Tailwind library you can use to have a bunch of pre-made components. So let's just go ahead and install this. But I mean, if you're following this tutorial, you can do whatever you want. You can use Material UI, you can use Chakra UI, use whatever you want to use, because really the component library is not the important part of this video. It's the entire functionality behind the speed dating site. So once I've installed this React Daisy UI, I can go ahead and go to my Tailwind CSS configuration. And I'm going to go ahead and just copy this. I think you also have to have Daisy UI installed. They do say that here. So I'm going to say npm install Daisy UI. That should install it. And once we've had that installed, let's go and open the Tailwind config. Now, one thing, if you're a beginner, Command P is your fuzzy search, and this lets you search your entire project based on your file names. So if you don't have this sidebar open and you just do Command P, type in Tailwind, hit enter, it'll take you right to your Tailwind config. It's super efficient to kind of get good at that. Content and plugin is what we need to overwrite. So for content, I'm going to cut this out. I'm going to go to line 3, go to the end, and just paste that in here. And then for plugins, we want Daisy UI. So hopefully we have that all set up correctly. And if we do, we can actually test it out. So let's go ahead and import a Daisy UI button like so. And I'm going to go ahead and just render a button out to the page inside of my main container here. And if this works, we should have a nice looking button that says click me. All right. And then you can kind of look through all these components if you wanted to get more information about like how you can create a card component or how you create a carousel or a tooltip or a table. It just has a bunch of stuff. It's kind of like Bootstrap, but it's for Tailwind. Some people argue that Daisy UI kind of goes against what Tailwind's supposed to do. But at this point, I just want something that works, right? You can also do themes with dark mode and stuff, but I mean, it's fine. That's not the goal of this video. So going back to this, how do we build this? Well, we need a name component and a name library. I'm sorry, a name label and a name input. So let's go and see if this has like a label here or an input. So they have an input. They also have an input group, which the input group, let's just start with the input and maybe a label too. Like, did they have labels here? So I'm gonna start with the input here, and I'm gonna go ahead and just put this here, and I'm gonna go ahead and auto import that. So if you highlight your word and do a control space on Mac, you will see that you'll get the auto import typically with, Daisy UI is not actually popping up here. So let's just go ahead and import this here, input, and that'll give us access to it. And then placeholder, I'm gonna put like your display name. Let's save this page and let's make sure we get something on the screen. So it says your display name. So we are making some progress. I would like to get a label going. I don't know if they have some labels kind of built into this. They have enter amount. Let's look at what enter amount looks like. They have a form label and a form. All right, so let's go ahead and paste that whole form in here. Typically, when you're dealing with accessibility, forms are good to have. I don't know why my auto import is not working for Daisy UI React. So let's just go ahead and kind of import these manually. And let's go ahead and enter this. This could be name. And then for this, I'm going to go ahead and see if I put the input here, what happens. Input group, your display name. So going back to the UI here, we have name and your display name. And then we also wanted, if you go to this, we wanted contact info. So I'm going to go ahead and just do another input group. And I kind of wonder why we even need the input group. Maybe I should go back and read a little bit about this input groups. It doesn't really tell you. And in fact, I don't know if we really need the input groups. So I'm going to try to keep this simple at first. I'm just going to go ahead and do this. And then I'm going to put another one called like contact info. Then I'm going to say your Facebook link, phone, email, your choice, or however you want them to contact you. This is probably too much text to put in a placeholder, to be honest, and it's going to go off the screen. So let me just do Facebook link, WhatsApp number, email, etc. Okay. It's still a little small, so maybe we can kind of expand this a little bit. So let's go ahead and add a class name to this. And I'm going to go ahead and say like width of 32. And see if that kind of expands anything. In fact, I think that made it smaller. So we might need to double that or do something else. So let's do 62 and see if that makes it bigger. You can also do like fractions. So I could say width of 2/3. Or I could say width of 1/3 to make it super small. I guess I kind of wonder, why is this thing not expanding the full width of the page? So let's go ahead and go to form control, which was this one. And I'm going to give this a width of 2/3 and see if that kind of expands a little bit larger. It did. You could also do like 1/3 or something if you don't want to make it that big. But then I could go with the full for the input and make that full here. Like so. All right, looks a little bit better. We should probably add some type of title or something. So inside main, let's just add like an H3, and I'm going to go ahead and add that a class name of text Excel and see how this kind of works. So I'm going to say join a speed dating session. There we go. And then we can kind of keep on styling this. Like I'd probably add some gap between these. Typically with Tailwind CSS, you can add flex box. This already has flex column on it. So luckily what we could do is just say gap of 8, and that'll kind of put spacing between a lot of this stuff. And then on the actual form itself, I could say flex column, and then gap of 8 as well if we want to make that consistent. And that's probably a little bit too much. Let me actually bring back that form.group. Actually, I think it was called an input group. So let's do the input group here. And again, I'm still learning like this Daisy UI structure, but I think you could kind of, no. Okay, let me undo that. So I didn't want to add the gap to these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to wrap these in divs. And this is probably not the best in terms of semantic HTML. I could probably find a different DOM element to use, but that'll kind of spread everything out a little bit better in spacing. And gap 8 might be a little bit too much. Let's just do gap of 6 and see how that works. Or gap of 4. So it doesn't look too bad. Might give this a little bit more gap here. All right, so going back, we kind of created this one, right? This is the page that we were initially designing and trying to go for, and it looks pretty good. Other than it shouldn't say click me here, it should probably say join. So let's go ahead and go to that button here. I'm gonna say join. And by the way, at any point in this video, if you see me doing something that's suboptimal, or you have a better suggestion of how I could do stuff, feel free to drop me a comment. I'm really open to feedback, and I'm always willing to improve my programming craft and improve my way of teaching. I might rename this a join session. So at this point, like, you can click the button, but some of these things should probably be required, like name and contact info. So let's try to figure out a way to make these validated. All right, so the easiest way is these are actually inputs, so you can add like required on them. But I'm actually going to use another library called like use form hooks. This is a pretty popular one that a lot of people like using, where you can kind of have a form and hook it up to validation and do whatever you want with it. So I'm going to go ahead and install it. I'll click the copy button here. I'm going to go ahead and just paste that in here. And that gives us access to some custom hooks that we can import at the top of this page, like so. I don't think we need the input group. Let me just remove that. But now we have a use form hook, and we can use this hook at the top of our next page here to get some functions, right? So let me zoom in a little bit so it's not too small, but you get like a register, a handle submit, a watch, a form state errors, all this stuff. So we're going to go ahead and just copy this. I'm going to put it right here. And once you have this, what you can actually do is go to your inputs, and you can actually attach the register to your inputs like this. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and copy this code. And for the name, I'm going to paste this right here. And I'm going to go ahead and put a register. The first argument is like the name of your input. So in this case, I'll just put name, and then I'll say required true. So you want the user to actually type something into this field. And you can do the same approach for the contact. I'll just say contact here. Contact info might be a better name for it. That's also going to be required. Okay, and then also on the form itself, we are given another function, kind of like a factory function that we can put on the form when the form is submitted. And I'll just go ahead and put that right here and go ahead and save that. And now notice that we pass it on submit. So handle submit calls on submit. And this is like a decorator basically that's going to call this function whenever we submit the form, and we'll get back some data. I like adding curly braces to all my stuff. Let me do that real quick. So now when you submit the form, if there's any errors, you're actually going to get to this errors variable set. So under the hood, if you don't really know how custom hooks work, typically it's just an abstraction of like state and effects and all these other things. So this errors is probably just some React state that's going to be set when there's errors on the page. And what we could do is we can use this errors and display the errors on the page here. So they do have an example of how you can do that right here. Let's just go ahead and do that underneath the inputs themselves. So I'm going to say errors.name, and these kind of map up one-to-one. So if you named this input name, you can display the error here using name. I'm going to say this field is required. I'm going to do the same thing over here. So underneath the contact info, I'm going to say contact info. And if these things ever get defined, it'll show the error. And I don't know if Daisy UI provides us with any type of error text, but really it's pretty straightforward. We could just give it some color of red. So for both of these spans, I'm going to say class name text is red of 500. How does that look? All right, so if we did that all correctly, so keep our fingers crossed and kind of double check the code to make sure we did that correctly. If there's no errors, this will be called. So let me kind of put a comment there so we're kind of aware of that. When everything is good, this is called. This is not called when any errors exist. All right, so let's keep that in mind, that onSubmit will never be called unless we've fixed all the errors on the page. So let's go back to their speed date site. I'm gonna go ahead and click join session. And let's make sure that, let me refresh the page just in case. I'm gonna go ahead and click join session. So I think the issue is that the button, I probably didn't put it inside the form. So typically you want to say type is equal to submit on these buttons and put them inside the form so that when your user presses enter on the last input or when they click on the button, those validation errors will pop up. Okay, so you saw that. I go ahead and click this button. We get some form validation errors. And now if I were to go ahead and type in some real information here, like so, and click enter, you'll see that it prints out the data down here with name and contact info. So we have a fully functional form with validation, with decent amount of styling and a submit button. I think we're making some good progress. So let's go ahead and figure out what the next steps would be. And the next steps we highlighted was after clicking join, we need to go to a waiting room. Okay, so we probably want to keep track of that information, right? So let's track that somewhere. Now we haven't implemented anything with Prisma or tRPC yet, so this might be kind of new if you're kind of new to the T3 stack, but it's really not too hard. So let me give you an overview real quick of the file structure of how this stuff works. So I talked about next in this pages directory. Let's talk about this servers directory. And this is like the tRPC library that's all set up. And by default, this create T3 stack utility that we ran over here in the terminal, this is giving us a router that has a couple of example routes. It's also giving us some connections to the database. It also gives us some context, I believe. Some of these things we probably won't even use, and I could probably delete them, to be honest. But I'm not going to go through all this code. A lot of this is boilerplate code that you need to get set up with TypeScript and tRPC to make it all type safe, to kind of give you all the type safety that you want. But if you open up router and go to index.js, this is the main place where you define all of your quote unquote endpoints, right? These are the methods, the queries, and the mutations you can do against your tRPC router. A lot of information. Let's just go ahead and look at this example router real quick. So with tRPC, you create all these routers, and there's two methods you can have on those routers. Either it's a query method or it's a mutate method. The query method is just supposed to fetch data from the database and return it to your users. The mutation method or the mutate method is supposed to take data from the UI and save it or persist it or do something with your backend server state. So those are the kind of the main differentiations between query and mutation. And we'll see those used throughout this tutorial. So let's just go ahead and I'm going to repurpose this example router. I'm going to go ahead and call this, I'll just call it like users, I guess. I'll call this users router. And inside of that main index file, I'm going to go ahead and import that users router here. We're not going to use that auth router, so I'm going to go ahead and delete that and clean up some code. And this merge method basically allows you to namespace your routers. So I'm going to say users. And all this will make sense in a second when we actually connect this from the front end. I'm just setting up the backend queries and mutations we can use. So whenever on the front end someone does a mutation to users dot whatever, it's going to go into this users router and it's going to look for one of these things. So in our case, let's just keep this simple and delete everything other than we need to add a mutation. So let's just go ahead and create one called like create user. And this router, this mutation method, it has the first argument is the name of your mutation, and the second argument is going to be an object that describes, first of all, what inputs does this thing require. And then you have a resolve function that basically is like your controller. It runs some code whenever the user properly sent in the required information. Okay, and the input that we get from the request of the user is actually validated using Zod. This is a third-party validation library, which is really useful because it's like it really keeps in mind TypeScript and type safety, so it's really useful if you're using TypeScript. But what are the things that our front end needs to send over to our router? It turns out that we need to send over a name, and we can say object, and then inside of this we can have an object here that kind of defines like what is the structure of the object that the user has to send over to the wire. So in our case, it's name, and we need to make this thing required. Right? They have to type in some type of name because you want other people on the speed dating site to know like who are they talking with, right? Actually, we don't have to put required. By default, everything's required. You can put optional on some of these things if you want to make stuff optional. But I'm just going to go ahead and say name and contact info. Those things are required. And what we're going to do here is we're just going to go ahead and print out the input just so I can show you what's going on, because we're going to connect this with the front end real quick here. All right, so let's go back to that page. Remember in pages/index, we created a page that consisted of a form that's going to do a submit to a backend tRPC mutation. So how do I actually do this on the onSubmit? Well, first of all, let's remember that when the form is completely valid, we'll get into the callback. So let's go ahead and just say to do call that mutation method. And one thing I do want to point out is I do believe you can add types to your form. So if you're kind of familiar with TypeScript, I can go ahead and say like register form is equal to name is a string and contact info is a string. And we can actually put that type here with a generic so that when I hover over data, actually I believe we'll have to do something like this so we can actually type this data that comes in. And then you can actually hover over handle submit and you'll see that it has a type of register form here. But this just gives you some better IntelliSense for TypeScript if you want it. But anyway, the idea is we need to actually call the tRPC mutation. How do we do that? Well, first of all, let's import that tRPC utility here. And I'm going to go ahead and put use mutation here. And I'm going to put that endpoint. Notice that with TypeScript, it already popped up for us. We have user.createUser. And that's all we need to do. So I'm going to go ahead and just have that equal to a destructed object. And I'm going to go ahead and bring back something called mutate async. Now, what a lot of people do, which I might actually do instead, is I'm going to go ahead and just say create users or create user here. So I'm going to make a variable called create user. That's going to be equal to this use mutation custom hook. And now what we have access to is something called mutate async. Now we're going to go ahead and call that method, and we're going to pass in data here. And that's how you can pass in that registration form that the user entered in name and contact info and send that over to this backend endpoint. So if everything is hooked up properly, we should hopefully be able to see this in the UI. Let's just go over here and I'm going to go ahead and type in some info, and I'm going to go ahead and click join session. Notice that it did a request to the backend. Down here, it made a request to users.createUser. And it sent some data. The one thing I'll point out with the tRPC is that the payload is a little bit different. I think it's using super JSON, so it's kind of hard to kind of parse through like what the heck you're looking at. But for the most part, what we actually are curious about is, did the backend get the data that we were expecting? And if you look here, it actually did. It printed out this console log here. So that's how you kind of connect the front end to the back end when you're using tRPC. And it's actually really, it's a great developer experience in my opinion, when I really enjoy using it. So now that we've successfully sent the data over to the backend, it would make sense if we store this data somewhere, right? So I'm going to go ahead and go to a file called schema.prisma. Now, if you haven't used Prisma before, this is a file that you can use to kind of define your database tables. They're called models in Prisma, but it's basically, a table for every model that you want. A lot of this stuff is kind of created for us because we use next auth, and I don't know if we're going to be using much of this, to be honest. We'll see. I'm just going to make a new model, and we're going to call that dating user. How about that? Or I'll call it speed date user. And hopefully all this extra stuff doesn't confuse you. Again, I don't know if we're going to use it, but when you create a model with Prisma, I can actually start declaring some columns that would exist on that SQL database. So in our case, I'm going to make this a string that has an auto-incrementing ID like so. And then we also want to keep track of name, which was, again, one of those input fields that we saw. And we also want to keep track of the contact info, which, again, was a string. So for right now, that's probably good enough. We're going to try to persist that data to our Prisma database here. So let's go ahead and stop our server real quick. I'm going to say npx prisma migrate dev. It's going to ask us to name a new migration script, because whenever you modify this file, it's going to prompt you to generate a new migration script so it knows how to apply these changes to your either local database or your production database. So in our case, I'll just make the script called adding speed date user. And there you have it. So once you've done that, restart your server. So I'll say npm run dev, and that'll start up that Next.js server for us. Pretty cool. And then also when you run that Prisma migrate, it's going to recreate some of your TypeScript types for Prisma. And then you can restart your next server and get that IntelliSense inside your resolve function here. So what we're trying to do is I'm going to say to do persist that user info. Okay. We got the information from the input here, and we saw that console log successfully, but now how do we actually save it to a database? Well, let's pull in another argument here, or another property from this destructed object called context. And when you're using the create T3 stack, you actually have something called Prisma on the context that you can actually grab your speed date user. And I'm going to say create. I'm going to pass it a data property, and I'm going to pass it input. You can kind of just do input here if you want to make it a little bit cleaner, but we already know this thing has been validated, and you can just pass that straight to data, I believe. Now, right now we're getting a TypeScript error because I do believe we kept this nullish on here, and if you hover over input, you'll see that this says it's an object that has name and contact info, or it's null and undefined. We actually never want this to be null and undefined. We want to force users to provide a name and a contact info. So I'm going to delete nullish here and save this file. And now that TypeScript error will go away because we are passing the correct data to our Prisma speed date user to create one. And again, you can use like async functions here. So I'm going to go ahead and just async await this. And we can go ahead and keep track of the newly created user. And I'm going to return that straight here from the resolve. All right, so let's try to go full circle here. Let's go back to the front end, which I believe was this file. And I'm going to go ahead and say like new user is equal to await on this call. We can go ahead and put an async here. And we can just go ahead and console log what does the new user look like. I could actually just do a console table maybe. And if we successfully did this, we should see the new user that was created print out to down here. I'm going to click join session. And notice that we get back an object that has a result, data, and that has some user information for us. In fact, let me just change this to a console log real quick. I want to double check something. I want to make sure I'm not teaching the wrong thing. Let's refresh this page real quick and click join session. Okay, there we go. I don't really know. This is kind of new to me. I think I'm using a newer version of tRPC, which is cool, I guess. I'm not really sure what this is doing. But the important part is when you console log new user, notice that we're getting back that information here. So we could probably keep track of the user ID somewhere if we wanted to, using Zustan or Redux or whatever global state management you want to use. Context, you can use context as well. But the main goal is once you've successfully signed up, we probably want to redirect the user to a different page, right? So we've successfully stored that information to a database here. But now we want to redirect the user for waiting for others page. How do I do that? Well, let's go ahead and go to our application here and go to pages. I'm gonna go ahead and make a new page called waiting.tsx. And I'm gonna copy the existing file that we just worked on. And I'm gonna kind of just added some stuff, right? So we don't need a form anymore. We don't need any of this stuff. And we probably don't need a majority of all this. But I'm going to go ahead and just change this H3 to say waiting for users to connect with ... You could be cool and add a spinner here, but let's just keep it pretty simple. And let's just delete anything that we are not using. So let's rename this to waiting page. And at this point, we should be able to basically redirect the user. Let me go ahead and go to pages index. I'm going to redirect the user once we've successfully mutated and created that user. We want to redirect to that page. So how do you do that? Well, there is something called use router when it comes to Next.js, and I can do the router.push. Now I'm going to go ahead and go to the welcome or the waiting page. Okay. So remember, with the file-based routing, every file name that you have is going to be an actual like URL. So in our case, we have a file name called waiting. That means we have a URL called /waiting. And as you nest folders and stuff, those nests will kind of link up to the naming and directory structure. Really, really interesting. But for right now, we don't really need new user. I'll just keep it there for right now. But let's just make sure that we can redirect to a new page. I'll say hello world is my name, or I can say like Rick James. And my contact info is, I don't know. I'll just put like example.com. How about that? So let's just go ahead and click join session. And we have successfully created that user and we've reconnected or redirected to a new page. I'm going to go ahead and show you one last thing real quick, which is really important when it comes to debugging Prisma. I'm going to say npx Prisma space studio. And when you run this, you get a nice little UI tool that you can actually kind of dive through all of your tables in your SQL database. I'm going to go ahead and click on speed date user and notice that as I create users, I get unique IDs for them. I get their names persisted in my database and I get their contact info. So this is the last thing that we actually just saw in the form when I submitted. And that is actually stored in our SQLite database. Okay, so we can query that later on if we want to, and we're going to be doing that probably shortly here in a bit. All right, so the next steps are we have a user who just kind of like registered or logged in or whatever. There's really not really authentication. But once you've submitted your name and your contact info, you're redirected to a waiting page. So the next steps are how do we implement some type of functionality where when other people join the application, we keep track of who's waiting and we can kind of connect those potential matches together. I haven't really thought about this too hard, so hopefully we can get a solution that's pretty good. But I think what we should do starting off is we probably need to keep track of the user status, right? Are they in the lobby? Are they waiting for a match? Or are they already currently matched up? That's kind of how I think about it in my head. I don't know if this is the best approach, but let's just go ahead and do a status. So we're going to go to the schema of Prisma. I'm going to put a status. And that's just going to be a string. And I think I can default it to waiting. I need to go and make sure I'm doing this right. Default to waiting. So when we create a new user, we're going to default it to waiting so that when someone else joins the application, we can just loop through and find any other users who happen to be waiting as well. And we can connect them somehow. Okay, so let's try to work on that. I'm going to do a Prisma migrate dev, and I'm going to go ahead and add a migration that says add waiting column, or add status column might make a little bit more sense. Add status column to user. And like always, whenever you do a migration, you have to kind of restart your next application so that you get that TypeScript IntelliSense all set up correctly. So when you do a default, I believe it'll loop through all your data and it'll just apply that default to anything that happens to be null. So we should be good. And I just want to verify that. So if I go to Prisma Studio and I refresh, I should see, actually, I think I have to restart Prisma Studio as well. So make sure that when you run a migration, you add columns or add tables, you kind of have to like restart a lot of stuff. So now we have a waiting column here for that Rick James user and all the other users. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and just delete these. Go ahead and delete them. So let's just go ahead and minimize this a little bit. And we need to, when you hit the waiting page, what we should probably do is we should look for any other users who happen to be also waiting and create a match, right? Match a user together. Now, how do we do this? I don't know. The first thing that comes to my mind is we need to basically make a new router or a new endpoint. And again, like I said, this is a live coding. So there's things I'm going to do that might not be the best, but we're going to try to do the easiest thing first that might work, and then refactor it if we need to. So let's go to the users router. And I don't want to return all the users who are waiting back to the front end because like that doesn't make sense. We shouldn't allow the users to see other people in the system. It should be random, right? So instead, maybe we should make another mutation. I don't know if it should be a mutation or a query, but let's do a mutation and see how this works out. I'm going to go ahead and say match, create match, find match. How about that? You know, I am going to make that a query. I'm going to make it a query called find match. And what this is going to do is it's actually not going to take any input. Let me take that back. It's going to take in a user ID. We need to know the user who's trying to find a match. And we also need to probably loop through all the users. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and say to do find all other users who have status of waiting who are not the user looking for a match. Okay, so we'll figure this out. How do we do this? Well, in Prisma, remember on the context, we can say context Prisma, and then we can go ahead and get that speed date user. And I'm going to say find first. And let's see if we can find the first record where, let's see, where the status is equal to waiting. And I want to try to do a not. So I want to find all the first user whose status is waiting, but who is also not this user ID. Now I'm going to go to the Prisma docs, find first where not in. I'm going to see if there's a way to easily do a filter or some type of not query. So there's a find many. I think I can use a not here. We will try this out. Let's see if this works. I'm going to go ahead and say status, where status is waiting and not user ID, which I think we should just call it ID. And I'll just go ahead and say input.userid. How about this? So I'll say first match is equal to await on that. And hopefully if that query is correct, we should actually get a user who's waiting for a match and who is not the current user ID that sent this request. All right, so let's give this a shot. We haven't actually done a query yet in the front end, so I think it would be cool to kind of do that real quick. So I'm gonna go ahead and say const empty object for now in tRPC, import that. I'm gonna say use query, and that takes in an array, and the first argument is going to be the endpoint or the query that we defined in our tRPC router that we want to call. And then the second is going to be our user ID. Unfortunately, here's the issue. We don't know what the user ID is. So we need to probably figure out a way to persist that between route changes and keep track of that. Now, the first thing that comes to mind is we could use something like Zustan to just have a global store somewhere, or we could use context. Really, the flavor of state management is kind of your choice. You can also use something called like Jodi if you want to also have like an atom where you can just store something simple like a user ID. I might try that out. I haven't really used Jodi before, but from what I've read, it seems like it's pretty easy to kind of use. Let's try this out. It's always cool to try new things and just learn new things as well. I know some people hate learning new things, but it's always fun to just play around and see how it works for what you need. So npm install Jodi, and let's go to the concepts. Let's see if there's, okay, maybe not the concepts. Let's just go to, just show me how to do it. I don't really care like about your background of how you do it. So let's go ahead and go to the atom. And on the, right now, I'm not sure what page we should probably add this to. I don't know if it really matters too much. I'm going to go ahead and just put it here on the main index, but you could probably pull that out to a different level if you wanted to. And I'm going to create an atom called, we'll keep it an empty string for right now. And I'm going to say user ID atom. So what this allows us to do is we can actually have some piece of state that we can access globally throughout our entire application. You don't have to, like, you can achieve this with Redux. Redux has a bunch of boilerplate to it. You can achieve this with Zustan, a little bit more boilerplate with Zustan. Jotai, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, Jotai, allows you to kind of modify this atom inside your React components, right? So let's try to figure out how you can use this. You can call it with use atom here. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure this thing is exported. And inside of this index file, after we have successfully created the user and we have the new user, we can just simply store the user ID somewhere. So I'm going to say store the ID. And I'm going to go ahead and import use atom from Jotai. And make sure you import that here, I believe. What am I doing? Let's just use atom here. I think I have to pass in the user ID atom. Okay. Again, I haven't used this before. This is the first project I'm ever using Jotai on, so I might mess some things up. So let's just rename this user ID and set user ID. And we're going to go ahead and just set it here. So I'll say new user.id. And what this hopefully, keep our fingers crossed, should allow us to do is we can actually do the same thing on the waiting page. And if I pull that in here, like user ID, I'm going to go ahead and auto import the use atom and auto import this from our index. And what that should hopefully allow us to do is we will get the user ID at some point. Now, this is potentially undefined, I believe. So we might have to look at this and not run this code unless this thing is defined. Now with React Query, I'm not really sure. I have to kind of look how to do that. String is not assignable to user ID. Oh, I have to do this. So make sure you have that set. And what I'm going to do is just console log this real quick to make sure that we're doing the right thing. Now let's go back to our application and let's give this a whirl and make sure that we're doing the right thing. So I'm going to go to the main page. I'm going to type in like Rick James. I'm going to go ahead and click join session. And when I do that, it prints out a user ID here, right? So we actually successfully persisted some state between two different pages. There's other ways you can do this as well. Like I think there's a way when you do router.push, you can actually pass in like some additional options or data so that you can actually get that on the other path or page. But I mean, Jotai is pretty simple to get going. All right, so the idea now is we're on the waiting page and we did a query to get back any user who is also waiting. So in our case, I don't think we are going to actually have the speed date user. It might be null in our case. We could probably go ahead and just use an effect on this. I'm going to say use effect. We want to listen to when the data, in our case, it might make more sense to rename this to like find user query. And then we could simply just do find user query dot data here. And I'm just going to go ahead and print out find user query data and figure out like what is this thing set to when this application first loads on this page. And probably, you know, print out something useful so we can actually differentiate between our logs, like what is what. All right, so we got back a find user data for Rick James, who's in the status of waiting. Now there's going to be some issues with our app. If someone were to close out of their browser, how does the UI know if the user is still there waiting or not, right? So there might need to be some type of timeout, or we try to like send a message to that user to see like, hey, are you actually still using the app? But let's just do happy path for right now. And what happy path is going to entail is deleting all of our users. So I'm going to delete our users real quick. And I'm going to log in like this. So one tab, I've logged in with one user, and we get back null because there's no one in the system, right? We were the first people, one of the first people to log in. And then I'm gonna open up another tab here, and I probably shouldn't have gone to the waiting page. Let me go to the main page. I'm gonna type in some more information. I'm gonna click join session, and we actually get back that first user who was on this tab. Now the question is how do we in the system like keep track of these two users? Because we want to pair them up somehow. So let's go back to find match. So if I go to the router slash, was it the index or was it the user router? Let's go to the user router, find match. So what this is going to do is I'm going to add some more logic here to say if we did not find a match, just return null. Okay. But if we did find a match, if we found another user, what we want to do is we want to kind of like pair them up. And I'm not sure what the best way to do that. I'm probably going to make another model in my schema. And we could probably make another one called like match. I don't know. And that will take an ID. And then I could say like, I don't know, I'll say source user ID would be a string. And then I'll say sync user ID. I don't know what a better name for this stuff is. Probably, I don't know, for user A, user B. But we'll keep track of them. Maybe we'll keep track of the status, right? So after the 5 minutes is up, as we talked about, maybe the match should be kind of canceled. So the default to the match, I'm going to go ahead and say like running, maybe. But we do need to link these two things together. So I'm going to go ahead and on the speed date user, I think what we could do is we could simply also say source user is a speed date user like this. And I could say sync user is a speed date user. And this is also needed because we need to keep track of like all the people we've matched with on the past, because we don't want to like have them keep on rejoining the same match with the same person. That wouldn't be really a cool experience. But let's see how we could do this. I'm going to go ahead and pull in this relation here. And I'm going to put this right here on these. And these things are going to basically link up like this. So I'm saying that this source user is going to use this field here, and it's going to reference the ID of speed date user. And then on delete cascade, for now, I guess we can keep that. That's probably fine. And then what we're also going to do is here, we're going to say sync user ID. I think I might also need to like put a special name here. So I could say like source user, maybe. I think for this to work, what we need to do is we also need to add matches, and that could be a match of an array. Let me just try adding some of these. I need to go back to the docs. Error validating field matches and model speed at user. The relationship field matches on model speed at user is missing an opposite relation field on the model match. Either run Prisma format or add it manually. Let me go to the Prisma docs real quick. This is one of the things where like I just sometimes forget how to set up relationships. But I mean, we should be able to have a thing relate to another thing. Let me just add name in front of these. I don't know if this is really needed. I think I need to do something like this. I don't know what the common convention is. I think you do something like this, and then I could do sync matches. All right, so we got this all set up. Again, like I think these are optional. Like you don't have to actually like set these relationships up. You could just have the ID stored here if that works better for you. But let's try it out. Again, this is a live coding, so there's going to be stuff that we do that isn't right. And we're going to refactor, hopefully. npx prisma migrate dev. And let's just keep track of what this is going to be called. We're going to call this adding match model. So, and let's go ahead and restart this and restart my next app. Cool. Now going back, we should have a match, which is empty. So let's go back to users, and we're going to say if we haven't found a user to match with, return null. But if we do find someone to match with, we actually want to create a new match. So I'm going to say context Prisma. I'm going to say match.create. I'm going to say data, and then I want to put, we could do this sync user ID. Could be input.user ID. Then we could say source user ID. Actually, I might switch this. I might say the source user ID is the person who initiated the find match, and the sync is the one where we found. So let's do first match.id like this. Status should default to, what did we say it was? Running. And then the ID should be auto-generated. All right, so pretty confusing, but I'm going to go ahead and return. I'm going to keep track of that match, and I'm going to return that match. So what we're trying to do here is hopefully if we get a match back in the UI, we're going to go ahead and get that match, which we have a query here, find match, user find query. If we get back some data, I'm going to say if the match is defined, so let's just pull this out to like a little variable so it's easier to read. I'm going to say if we got a match, then we're going to actually redirect the user to a new page. So let's go ahead and bring in like router equals use router, like so, and then router.push. Let's just go to a chatting page. How about that? Now we probably want to also provide the ID of who you're chatting with. Okay, so let's just go ahead and we could do that in an atom again with Jotai, or we could put it in the URL. Don't know what the best approach is, but we're going to get that match back and we're going to use the ID of the match. So I'm going to say chatting/match ID. And that's going to basically redirect us to a page where we can chat with the person that we're matched with. Let me bring in router here. Probably need to have that as a dependency inside the array. Let's do that. Which works great, but that's when you first load this waiting page. It's going to find you a match and then redirect you. But what about the person you just matched with? How do they know to redirect? So we need to somehow either have long polling or just polling in general, or WebSockets. I'm not going to get down the route of WebSockets just yet. But also, if you're on this page and you want to basically every so often refetch to see if you've or have been matched with somebody, okay? So let's do another effect when this page mounts. And then I'm going to basically set a interval. So I'll say const interval is equal to set interval, and we're going to call some code every 5 seconds. How about that? This isn't super critical that they get matched up instantly. Or we're going to call some code, and we're going to do another query here probably. Make sure you return a cleanup method on your effects, especially if you're using strict mode in React 18. So I'll say clear interval, and I'll just put in the interval. And the idea is every 5 seconds, we want to maybe call another endpoint called like get match. Going back to the router, I'm going to go ahead and copy this whole query, and I'm going to go ahead and say get match. And what this is going to do is, let's say I'm user ID A. I want to find any match that I might have been assigned to. So I'm going to say match is equal to .match.find first. And then I want to find a sync user ID that matches my input.id or my input.user ID, like that. And I'm going to return that. Okay, so hopefully this works. I don't know, we'll have to test this all out. But now I have a way for the UI to basically query the backend to say, hey, has someone already matched with me? If I have, I need to also redirect. So let's kind of make a new git match query here. tRPC, use query. And I'm going to go ahead and pass that a user get match. And we are going to go ahead and pass that the user ID as well. Now, when you're using the use query, you can actually call a method called refetch, like so. And we might need yet another third effect, which is getting a little complex, but let's just try to do the simplest thing first until this works. So very similar to this one. We're going to go ahead and copy this query, or this use effect, and we're going to say the get match query.data. So if we actually get back some defined data, then we know we've gotten a match, right? And then we need to basically do something similar where we redirect the user, like so. We could dry this up a little bit. Maybe we should, but let's just test this first and see if this actually does what we think it does. All right, so let's close out of some of this stuff. I'm gonna go back to the main page here, and I'm gonna go back to the main page here. And I'm gonna refresh because I wanna start fresh on both pages just in case. So I'll type in Rick James here and then whatever I want for join session. That should take me to a waiting page. And hitting this chatting endpoint, we actually got redirected. So I should probably go back 1 second. I'm gonna go back to the main page and we are going to delete some stuff. We're gonna delete all of these matches and then we're gonna go to the users. And let's delete these two. We're gonna have to add in a lot of extra fail safes when stuff isn't going according to plan. But I was hoping we could just do the happy path to like get this working. All right, so let's type in Bob and I'll go ahead and click join. That should create a user with the status of waiting. And then I'm gonna go ahead over here and type in like James. Okay, maybe not James. I'll say Jane. And then I'll say, no, I didn't even think about genders. I'm assuming if it's a speed dating app, you want to be able to put your preference of what you're looking for. But again, happy path. Let's just get two people connected and share some webcams with each other. Let's click join session. And notice that they both got redirected to the same match ID. So I think the app is actually working. I think everything is working the way we want it. There's probably a ton of things that are broken or buggy, race conditions, but we have successfully gotten them both to redirect to the same chat room ID, which is great. I think this is good progress. Let's go ahead and first of all, let's commit what we have because we have made some progress and it's always good to do small commits along the way. I'm going to go ahead and add everything and I'll say git commit successfully got 2 users to join the same match. And let's push that. Awesome. All right, so now that we have 2 people matched up, we need another page called, what do we call it? Chatting. So let's make a folder. The way it works in Next is you have a folder, you have subroutes like this, you'd have chatting, and inside of here you probably have a bracket called like match ID.tsx. And we're gonna go ahead and copy all of this and go ahead and delete this, delete this, delete this. We'll keep the user ID. We might need that. We might not. I don't really know. We'll probably need the router too, so I'll keep that in. We'll probably need tRPC. Let's go up a level here. This probably needs to go up 2 levels. And then I'm going to say chatting with user. All right, so for the first step is when both users connect to the same chat room, we want to probably display who you're chatting with. Okay, so let's try to do that. So let's go ahead and go to the router for the users. And we're going to go ahead and get match is going to tell you who you're matched with. So maybe that's actually what we want. This will tell you who you're matched up with. But that only checks the sync user. So we might also need to, change this a little bit. Let's make another query called actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a new router called matches.ts. And we're going to go ahead and kind of following kind of like CRUD. And I'm going to say get match. That's going to take in, that's going to be a query. Let's get rid of all this other stuff. And I'm going to say matches router. Okay, so bear with me. What I'm doing is I'm creating a brand new router, which is going to take in a match ID. And we're going to basically get the match. So I'm going to say, let's delete all this code so we can start fresh. We'll say match.find unique where ID is equal to input.match ID. Okay, so that'll give us back the match. And we could probably just return that right then and there, and that'll give us the user IDs who is associated with the match. Now, what we could also do is we could include think there's a way to include. So I'm going to say include, and then I'm going to go ahead and say sync user true, source user is also true. And now that we have that router, let's go ahead and hook that up. So I'm going to say dot merge here in this main tRPC router where we kind of connect everything together. And I'm going to go ahead and put one called matches dot. I'm going to merge it with that matches router here, like so. Okay, so now we have a way to actually get the match by the ID, because remember we have the URL here with the match ID. So we need to fetch the users who are associated with this and display them on the page. All right, so let's go ahead and close out some of the stuff. We can always reopen it. And when we're on the match ID page, what we're going to do is we are going to get the match query. I'll say use tRPC.use query. Like so, pass in an array, matches get match, and I also want to get the match ID, which we don't know what it is yet. We can probably get it from the router. I think we can do, actually there's a different way to do it. I think there's like use query or use location. So let's try const location equals to use location. Maybe it's called use query. No. Maybe it's router. Router dot query dot match ID. That's what it might be. So I'm just going to go ahead and say const match ID is equal to this, and let's just put an exclamation mark so we know it's always going to be defined. But I'll just say as string. How about that? Okay, so what this is going to do is basically we get the router and then we check the match ID that it should be on the query, which will be like this. And then we should be able to use that match ID to get back the match query. And we should be able to display the user. So I'm going to go ahead and just say like const other user name is going to be match query.data. And we are going to go ahead and get the, we have to figure out if we are the sync user or the source user. So I'm going to go ahead and make a constant up here. So this is sync user equals a match query dot sync user ID. Oh, sorry, I'll do this data dot sync user ID. If that is equal to the user ID that we're currently have in the Jotai store, then we know we're the sync user. All right, so we need to basically either get the sync user or the source user. Now, what I'm going to do is do a ternary here and say is sync user, and then I will just say sync user ID. You know, that'll break the TypeScript type safety. So what I'm going to do instead is I'm going to change this to a let equal to an empty string, and then I will say is sync user ternary. Then I'm going to say other username is equal to this dot data dot sync user dot name, like so. And then I will just go ahead and do the same thing like this. In fact, I could pull this out like so, and I'll do source user. All right, so let me slow down because I don't think I'm doing a good job explaining a lot of what I'm doing right now. So when we first load this page, we're going to try to get the match back. Match.data will have the match record, which will have the sync user and the source user. And then we're going to check if we ourselves are the sync user, then we want to get the other user's name. This is kind of confusing, but I think this is the only way we can kind of do it. And if it's not set, I mean, we should probably say like if this is set, then we do this logic because there's a potential that data is not set yet. So I'll do that. And then let's just go ahead and say chatting with other username. So moment of truth. I mean, we could try this out. I'm guarantee you, we're probably going to have bugs, more than likely. But I think this might work pretty well. I think this might work. In fact, I could probably do this over here so I don't have to have this question mark. And yeah, let's go ahead and go to Prisma Studio. And we have to kind of clear this out again. It's kind of a pain because like we haven't figured out a way to like deal with when multiple people have closed their browser and haven't deleted their records. All right, so let's refresh. That's all empty. I'm going to type in Jane here and type in whatever. And then over here, I'm going to type in Bob and type in whatever. And now it says chatting with Bob. So this tab, I typed in Jane and now it says chatting with Bob. Over here, it says chatting with Jane. Awesome. Now we have two users who are literally connected together, and we can probably display some webcams or something. And what I'm going to do is I'm also going to go ahead and commit. So git commit -am, and I'll say adding the chatting page. Before I do that, let me rename this a chatting page. So adding the chatting page and connecting two users. Go ahead and do that and push that. So the next steps, I think we have the two users kind of connected together. What we should try to do is try to connect them via Agora with their webcam and microphone if possible. So let's go ahead and go to the Agora dashboard. So console.agora.io. Once you've created an account, you should be able to create your own project, right? So I'm going to go ahead and click on this create button over here. And we're going to create a project called speed date. Use case could be called, I don't know, social chat room, I guess. And I'm going to go ahead and make this secured. We want to make sure that we actually have a real token server on the back end so we can actually like generate secure tokens for our users. I'm going to click submit, and then that'll create our application. So inside of this application or this app, we have access to an app ID and a primary certificate. We're going to need both of those to be able to allow our users to basically connect via Agora to each other using a webcam. But before we dive into that, I do have to show you that in order to generate access tokens, like these are the things that are used to allow two users to securely connect to the same chat room and have no one else be able to join it. I'm gonna go ahead and install this package. So Agora access token, this is like a node package you can use. So over here in the terminal below, let's just go ahead and run it. And we need to basically take some of their example code here. I think if you actually go to the repository, actually, in fact, yeah, let's just go to the repo. I think they have some examples here. We'll go to source. Actually, I'll go to sample and I'll go to RTC. So RTC is the library that we want for communicating via webcam and stuff. RTM is the library that you can use for communicating via text and messages. So let's just go ahead and look at this sample here. And we're going to copy out pretty much all this code and we're going to use what we need from it. So when a match is created, we are going to go ahead and go to that match. So let's go to the match router. Actually, it's in the users router where we create the match. So create match. Yeah. So we create the match here. And what we also want to do is we need to create some type of token that both these users have access to and can basically securely talk to each other with. And again, we're not trying to focus too much on the security here. The main goal of this video is to show you how to do this with the Agora API and have like these people join a speed dating room. If you wanted to, if we have time, maybe I'll go back and make sure this is super secure with real logins and passwords and stuff. But for the most part, this is just a prototype having some fun, right? So for now, I'm going to cut these things out and I'm going to put them at the top of my file. And let's make sure those are imports with ES7 imports. I'll do from like so. I think we should just do that. And I will go ahead and roll here. All right, so hopefully I did that right. Oh, you know what? I should probably go and look at the actual NPM because I think I imported the wrong thing here. Let's go ahead and import this like so. I'll import this and I'll say from like so. And we don't want any of the RTM stuff. So now that we have the token builder, let's read this message. Important, build tokens with either the UID or with the user account. Comment out the option you do not want to use below. So build token with the UID, build token with the user account. The UID, let's kind of look through here real quick. So what happens is you need the app ID, which in our case we got here. So let's go find the app ID and copy that. And I'm going to go ahead and say process.env.app Agora app ID. Okay. And we're going to go open up our .env file, and I'll say Agora app ID. This is something that's only used on the front end for right now. So I'll just go ahead and save that. And then for the app certificate, that is this thing over here. So let's copy that. Let's also make this come from process.env.agora app cert. Go back to the .env, Agora app cert, paste that in. All right, so now channel name. So the channel name is something unique that you should use, that like both users have to connect together on the channel. Luckily, we have a match and that has an ID. So I'm gonna say match ID here. That could be your channel name. For UID, what we're gonna do is we're gonna put, I don't think it really matters, UID or role. Maybe I'll use this build token with a count so I can pass it a string. I don't know if there's a main difference. But what we're going to do is we're going to pass in the app ID, which we should make sure that's exclamation mark so it's defined. And for the account, that's actually going to be input.userID. So we're going to use the user ID of the person who initiated this find match, like so. And we'll have to kind of play around with this, make sure we got this right, because we probably might get it wrong. And let's just return the token as well, because I think the token needs to be sent to the front end. Like so. So we're changing the interface here a little bit, which means that the back end probably needs to be fixed as well. And I'm going to go ahead and restart the server because we did change the .env file. So we need to make sure that these things are actually defined the next time we connect. So going to the front end, this actually has two things on it now. It has match and it has a token. So I'm going to go ahead and make sure that I'm going to go ahead and say if this is not defined, I'm just going to go ahead and return. Otherwise, we can get the match and the token, and we don't need to check it like that. I think that's a better approach. All right, so the token, when you first connect, maybe we should actually store this on the Prisma database as well. I think every user should have their own token. So I don't know if it makes sense. Maybe we should actually have a separate endpoint for generating these tokens for a user. I'm trying to think what would be the best or easiest approach going forward. So this one, I should probably add a comment here because this isn't actually that intuitive. So use effect app first loads, find a user to match with. Interval fires someone matched with us. Okay. This needs to be refactored because it's not very clear. But the token as well, like we could store this in a Jotai store potentially, or Jotai Atom. Because we're going to need this token later to connect with the webcam in the microphone, right? So I'm going to go ahead and just make another Atom, which if I go back to the main pages index, I'm going to go ahead and copy that approach. I'll say token Atom is equal to Jotai Atom, empty string. And we're going to go ahead and just say const token and set token is equal to use Atom. And I'm going to pass in the Atom, token Atom like that. So now when we get the token back, let's just go ahead and set it. And then we'll push the router to go to another page and we should have access to that token. So I actually might refactor this a little bit. What I might do instead is when this page first loads, when the chatting page first loads, maybe that's when I'll just generate tokens for you. It'd probably be a lot easier than adding all this logic here. So, you know, it's okay when you're live coding to change your mind about stuff. So I'm gonna go ahead and just add an effect here. And when this page first loads, that's when we're gonna call an endpoint to basically get a token. So I'm sorry, let me delete all this stuff. I'm changing my mind. I don't think we want this. I'm gonna go ahead and just keep this as it was. I did think it made a a little bit more sense. And I'm going to go to this endpoint. I'm going to take back a lot of this code. I'm just going to return the match here. And I'm going to make a new router called tokens. And let me go to the matches router, and I'm just going to add that here. So I'm going to do a query. We can call it get token. Like so. This could take in an input. You need to pass in your own user ID. Actually, we should probably pass in a, yeah, we need your user ID. I'll say zstring, and probably a match ID, zstring. Like so, and then async resolve input context. Save this. Let's see, are we missing something here? We have this. This. There we go. Auto formatted works means that our code's good. So I'm going to paste all this code in, and I'm going to go back and pull out some of the other stuff that we added to that user's route. In fact, I'm going to go ahead and pull this one out. I'm going to put this to the top of the file. And it's very similar. Like, we're going to make the app ID the token. The channel could be the input.match ID. Account could be user.id. Same idea, we're giving them the ability to publish stuff to this channel. We create the token, and we're going to send back that token for them. Okay, so we don't actually need to do anything with Prisma or the context here. So what we could do instead, let me just make sure I'm not having like all this. Let me make sure there's no bugs anywhere else. I don't know, it looks pretty good. So when this component mounts, we want to fetch that token. So I'm going to say const token query is equal to tRPC use query matches.get token, and we want to pass in the match ID and the user ID. Okay, those are the things you need to get your own token. And when we get back token data, what we could do is just say if there is no token query data, let's just return. We don't want to do anything yet, but when we get the token, connect to Agora video room using token and match ID or whatever. Let's actually verify. I should probably verify this works first of all. Make sure everything works back and we get a token. In fact, I should probably display the token here. I'll just say like token query.data just for the time being. So let's just go back to here, and I'm going to go ahead and clear out like a lot of this stuff. If we go back to this page, the main page, type in Bob, type in Jane, click join, we get back a token. So we know our token endpoint is working fine, and we got a token. Both of these people get their own special token that they can use to connect to the chat room. Let's see if we can take this a step further and actually get the webcam to show up. So I have done some other projects with Agora with the video call, so I'm going to dive into this code real quick just to make sure I understand like what's going on. We have a video room. You see here we have a token, an app ID, a channel. And what we're going to do is we're going to look through this real quick, because we're probably going to use a lot of this code, honestly. And it'd probably take me a full video to like explain all this. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to install the Agora RTC SDK ng. You need this to be able to connect easily to like Agora and do some stuff. So let's just go ahead and install that like so. And once that's installed, we can actually on this page itself, let's pull that in. And we do need the app ID. So I'm going to go ahead and I need to set up another process.env called like next public Agora app ID, like so. And I'm going to force this to be defined, and then I'm going to go to the .env file, and that's going to be a duplicate of this one. We need to do this so it shows up in the React front end. You have to have next public for something like that to actually show up. But now that we have the app ID, I'm gonna do one more thing. When I'm working with this library a little bit in the past, it's just a little bit more difficult, especially when you're dealing with strict mode. So I am gonna turn strict mode off with next. So strict mode, turn it off. Just like that. It's not the best with React 18, but I'd rather just get it working and then come back and turn strict mode on and try to fix any bugs we might have. Strict mode is there to just help you find bugs. So again, it's like, TypeScript. You just add on the amount of additional checks that you want until you feel like you're confident with your software. So we have this function here called create Agora client, which if I look at this real quick, let's just kind of scroll through here. We're going to copy some of this stuff out. Not all of it, because since we're not using strict mode, I think this will be a little bit more straightforward. But in the effect, if we have the token, right? So if the token is actually set, token query.data, we can actually start creating an Agora client. So I'm going to go ahead and say create client, pass it RTC in VP8. These are just settings you need to like tell Agora, like what type of data are you sending across the wire for your webcam. And then we're going to keep track of some tracks, which we might need to pull that out the state maybe. We'll figure that out. This stuff I'm going to skip for now. All right, so over here, client join. I'm going to go ahead and make a connect function like this, just so that we have access to do some async await stuff. And I'm going to call it. So I'll just say connect here. And we're going to pull a lot of this logic out and put it inside connect so that we can simply do something like this, where we say await client join, and then we need the app ID, which we already have. We need the token, which we have, and then we need the channel. So the channel is actually going to be called the match ID. That's like the unique ID that for the channel. So only you and this other user know about this match ID. So you can kind of join that. And once you've joined this channel, you can kind of start listening to some events. So for example, I'm just going to listen to when a user publishes their tracks. Okay, so what happens here is when the client sees that someone else has joined, we can actually subscribe to their media. So for example, subscribe to their webcam. And then we're going to basically keep track of the user who just joined. So I have a method here called onVideoTrack. Looks like it just keeps track of the users who are in the actual chat room. So let's just go ahead and make a state variable up here called users and set users. And we'll pull in some state here. And we're going to go ahead and just push this on. So I'm going to say ... users and user like this. And I'm going to use the setter here so we can actually like get the proper state. Like so. Now in terms of TypeScript, I'm just going to make this kind of sloppy. I'm going to put any for right now just so we don't get all these like type errors, which is fine. And I'll come back later and probably add in the types. So let me recap. We are going to create the client. We're going to join using the token and the app ID, etc. Then we're going to listen to any other users who join the channel with us. So this is all connecting to the Agora APIs and everything like that. And once we basically connected, what we need to do is we need to create some tracks. So I'm going to go ahead and copy this one. So I'll do this. Tracks is equal to this. This is basically going to load up your webcam and your microphone. And we probably need to keep track of these somewhere. So I'm just going to go ahead and say like let tracks set it equal to nothing for right now. And we're going to, let's see. Tracks is assigned but never used. Okay, so we're going to get the tracks. This will prompt your browser to like accept webcam and stuff. And then we want to publish these tracks. So basically this tells everyone else in the chat room like, hey, here's my webcam and here's my audio streams. And it's a lot of stuff to get set up, but once you have it set up, you don't have to really deal with this anymore. So create the client, join the chat room, listen for other people to join, publish your events to everyone else in the room. There's only 2 people in the room at all times, so it doesn't really make too much sense to like have to do too much publishing. But yeah, that's basically, I think, what we have to do. And now what we could probably also do is we need to keep track and display the video at least. So let's try to figure out how we do this. So I think I have another component that I set up called video player. And the way this works is you get a video track and you play it on a ref, like so. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna go ahead and make a ref. Actually, I'm gonna copy this whole video player thing out. We could probably reuse this. It's really basic. So inside the same component, let's just drop in video player. This takes in a user, and it's going to play that video player here. I know I have like a ton of errors everywhere, but it's fine. Let me go back to video room. Am I importing this thing right? Create client. I wonder if there's some types I need to install. Types. I don't know why this thing's complaining. I think it's fine. So let's go ahead and see if we can display the video player somewhere. I'm going to go ahead and just put a video player here. How do we do it in this other project? By the way, this is a good benefit of having a repo with a bunch of projects, or a GitHub account with a bunch of repos of just various projects, because now you have like this collection of code that you can just grab from. So I could just do this. I think we're using Tailwind, so I don't need to grab all that stuff. I'm going to paste that in, and then we're going to go ahead and just do like a class name here. I'll do like this. And then I'm going to go ahead and say grid calls of 2, because we just want like 2 panels side by side. And when we render those video players should kind of be left and right, I believe. Okay, so we have the user. And if you display the user here on this video player component, I think it should just show a video stream, which is cool. I don't know why I'm getting so many errors everywhere. Yeah, I don't know why this one's complaining, because like I am assigning it up here. I guess technically I could just do this. I don't think we need to keep track of tracks at all. So I'll just go ahead and delete it. Return tracks. Actually, we're gonna have to refactor this probably just a little bit. So user, yeah, let me print out what this is real quick. What is user? I don't even know. Yeah, I think let's see if there's a way we can get this like try to get this to work. I'm assuming there's gonna be a lot of issues with trying to refresh the page. So let's just go ahead and refresh here. Window is not defined. Okay, so there is an issue with using Agora in Next, because I do believe it has like hard-coded logic to look at the window and stuff. So to get this working, we actually need to lazy load it. And I did this in another project as well. So let's go ahead and go back to, I'll say Agora online chat room, I believe. And if I look at the source and look at the pages, I believe on the index, maybe it's not on that one. Maybe it's on the dashboard. You'll see here, I actually pull in this here with a lazy loading import, basically. So we kind of need to do something very similar, where I'm going to go ahead and instead of importing it here, I'm going to import it in the effect. So that's only lazy loaded on the front end, like so. I'm going to go ahead and grab this package, and I'm going to delete this. And it's called Agora RTC, and we want to basically keep track of the const create. You know, I could just do this. I'll say const create client, like so. I believe that exists on there. Let's try it again. Let's go and let's refresh the page. Chatting with Jane. chatting with Jane. You'll see here it's actually asking to connect my microphone in my camera. So let's just go ahead and connect that, and I'll allow it that as well. So cool, I got my camera displaying here. I probably need to turn off the debugging logs because there's quite a lot of logs firing off. Not sure if it's too important, but there is an issue with React Query. Every time you refocus the page, it like fires off the query again, which is not what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and just go back here to the main page. And I'm going to say React Query turn off refocus fetch, because that's going to be causing a lot of issues. Refetch on Windows Focus. You can turn it off. I think I could just turn it off for this particular query as well. So wherever I'm doing use query, we want to not refetch the token every time, because that's going to cause quite a lot of issues for us, I believe. So I think I can go here and say, what is it called? Refetch on Windows Focus false. And then that won't refetch it every single time. Let's go back to the users real quick. And I'll delete those. And I'll type in Bob here. Just do this whole process again. I'll type in Jane, type in hello. Go ahead and join. And that should connect. Cannot get gateway server. Invalid token authorized failed. All right, so I guess we have to kind of debug what's going on here. So we should be able to connect to the client, join. So we should probably kind of console log some of this stuff. The UID. We're passing the UID of null here. I kind of wonder if we should pass the user ID. You might need to do that. I'm not too sure. Let's go back over here and see. If I refresh the page, will that keep track of everything? It won't. It doesn't. UID of that. All right, so let's try to debug this. In this up here, the Jane stuff, I don't know why it's kind of like duplicated, but we should have gotten a unique token that connects our user ID, which maybe we should print out the user ID too, so we know who we are. I'll just go ahead and print out like user ID. And chatting with, it should print out the user ID here. Let me refresh both of these pages. All right, let's try it one more time. Let's just try going back to the main login page, and let's just start fresh. Again, like there's a lot of engineering that has to go in to make this stuff like super resilient to whatever type of issues. So I'm gonna go ahead and just type in like hello and whatever. The other person could be world, join session. That should connect me with world with that user ID. And then over here, that should connect me with hello with this user ID. Okay, yeah, so one thing I forgot is that it doesn't actually show yourself. And now that I think about it, like, why would you need to see yourself if you're on a speed dating site? You just need to see the other person. Maybe it's cool to actually see yourself in like a small little window, maybe like a preview window. But let me go back to my code real quick, and I just want to verify how I did that. I think what happens is you get the tracks in this video player. If I look at the video player real quick, it kind of uses the video track that we got back on the user, and it plays it. Okay, so video track, what we could actually do is we could have another video player here. And I'm not gonna keep track of this in a map anymore. I'm just gonna say user, I'll say other user and set other user. I'm gonna keep this more simple. So instead of calling set users, I'm just going to go ahead and just say set user, because this is the other user, right? This is the other user that we're trying to connect to, like so. And if user is defined, which I think there might be logic to not crash if it's not defined, maybe not. I'm just going to go ahead and say if user, and we can conditionally render this player. Oh, we called it other user, I'm sorry. So other user, like so, like so. And then we could also have a video player for ourselves. So I could just say, we don't even need key here anymore, just pass it user. And then I could just say user, and we just need to pass in an object. I believe this thing takes in a UID and a video track. So let's just go ahead and go down to there. UID could be user ID, and then video track. Is that what I called it? Or already forgotten? Yeah, video track. So let's go and make sure the video track is set, and we'll have to like set that somewhere. So let's just go up here, and we're going to go ahead and make a state variable called const video track set video track equals use state, and we're going to go ahead and make sure we set that. So where we can set that is here. I can say const tracks is equal to this whole thing, and I think tracks of 1 is your video, because it says microphone and camera track. So I'm assuming 1 is the camera track. We want to set that up on the page. So that's how we can display our own video track. And I probably want to say video track, and because this is undefined until you finally connected to the Agora API. So let's see what happens here. UID conflict. So if I refresh the page, let's see what happens. We get back this. I'll refresh this page. What happens? We get back me and this other one. So the goal is I want to make the other person larger. So let's just go ahead and look at video player, and let's see if there's a way we can like maybe not have to do this as much. Let's see, video player, and then I'm going to go ahead and pass in class name like this. Class name is equal to class name, and I'm not going to pass in some styles like this anymore. I actually want this to be configurable. So let's go back to the main match. And I'm going to go ahead and, since we're using Tailwind, like I could just pass in class name, and this will be like width of 500 pixels, height of 500 pixels. Okay, so they're going to be larger, and then ours is going to be something smaller, and probably at the bottom right of the page, because we don't really care too much about seeing ourselves, right? I definitely messed something up. So let me not get like rate limited. So let me go ahead and close out of that. So I'm not sure why this would keep on refreshing. We're passing class name here to video player, just so that we can dynamically increase the width of these things. And we're also passing the user and the video track here. Yeah, let's just delete some of these. I'll say Bob, and then again, we'll do a Jane connect. So I'm wondering if maybe the width of these things. Oh, I think the next dev mode, like when I save files, it really messes up with this stuff. So I might have to like add in some disconnect logic. But let's just go ahead and hover over this. The video player should have displayed with some hard-coded pixels, but it did not. So I might just, it might be easier to just pass in the style instead of the class name. So I'll do this, I'll pass in the style. And then down here, I'm just going to hard code these, do some inline styles. Like so. Go ahead and do the same thing for this top video player. If I'm going to do 500 by 500. And go ahead and save that. And there, looks a little bit better. And in fact, we don't need to display like the UIDs over these people anymore. I'll just delete that. Actually, I don't know. Does it make sense to have like you and them displayed right next to each other with the full screen? Maybe it does. Maybe I'm just making this overly complex. Like, let's just go ahead and make them right next to each other. 300 pixels. Let's save this. And now I don't know why there's 3 of them showing up. Kind of weird. I should probably do some cleanup logic here. So like this thing should be like user.videotrack.stop ref.current. I don't know if that's the proper way to do it. And just return that from the cleanup function. But as you can see, it keeps on appending things to the page. I'm not even sure how that's happening. So there we have 2 people connected from 2 different tabs. One of them is Jane. One of them is supposed to be Jane as well. But there's just some additional stuff we'll probably have to work out to get this more resilient. But we probably should add like a little timer, and I could get rid of the token here. Where's that token be displayed? Like, we don't need to display the username. We don't need to display the token anymore. And we could have a timer when this app loads that like counts down from 5 minutes. And when it's finally done, we could redirect the user to a done page, I guess. But let's just go ahead and commit what we have. So I'm going to say git status commit am, and I'll say adding the Agora SDK to display some videos along with the token server endpoints. So there we have a way to basically get 2 webcams showing up. Again, this is like a prototype, and we're going to have to keep on adding in more functionality and features to make this more resilient. But I think we're making some good progress, and it looks pretty cool. We have 2 webcams showing up. It'd be cool if I could actually get a second laptop set up so I can have like a different camera connecting to the same app. And maybe I'll do that in just a bit. So I think we've made some pretty good progress with this app. There's a lot of errors on this page that I want to try to like clean up. So let's see if we can do that real quick, because kind of getting overwhelming with all this stuff. So the video player, honestly, like all this cares about is the video track. So maybe we should refactor this to only take in the video track like this. And there's more errors saying that the ref value, ref current will likely have changed by the time this effect has cleaned up. So they're saying I should cache this to, I don't know, DOM ref or player ref, I believe. And we could basically just do this. And that cleans that one up. And this one needs a dependency of video track, which, if this isn't defined, let's just return. I want to make sure that video track is defined before you try to call play or whatnot. Don't know if it's needed there, but better safe than sorry, I guess. So now there's no more errors there, which is great. Let's go down. Actually, there are errors right here. I'm going to go ahead and just put video track of any style of any. In fact, this should be an object, I guess. Now, I don't know if there's a real like type for video track. Let's go look. So this thing, when I get a user, it's an Agora RTC remote user. And then if I call video track on it, what is that? remote video track. So if you wanted to do this properly, I mean, we should say remote video track. Make sure you import that. Now, this one is saying that player ref could potentially be null. So I don't know, maybe we should also say if player ref, then return. And then this one doesn't even need anything. I could just stop it, I guess. All right, so that's a good benefit of including your types because they give you that extra feedback if you're doing things wrong or not. So make sure you do that. In this one, the video track, I mean, this should probably also be an I remote video track as well, like this. Other user. This one should actually be a I Agora RTC remote user. So I Agora RTC remote user. Make sure you type everything properly and you'll get less errors everywhere and you'll get more feedback to make sure you're doing stuff right. So now if I hover over tracks, it says the first one is a microphone audio track and the next one is a video track. So yeah. Awesome. Although I'm not sure why it's saying it can't. I guess it could potentially be, oh, this was a camera track. Okay, so it's not a remote one, it's an actual like camera track. I camera video track. All right, is this still throwing errors everywhere? So this one could be video track, and other user could be other user.video track. Hopefully that'll get rid of the errors. Yeah, so this one I actually need to like say, make sure it's defined here. And then this one as well. This one should be video track, and we should pass in video track here. All right, so the issue is that this could be either or. I think I need to go here and say like, this could be an I video track. Actually, what do I call it? I camera video, okay. All right, so make those either or. Get rid of all those errors on the page. Now this is a lot cleaner in a sense. This one, use effect has missing dependencies, match ID and user ID. So let's go ahead and pass those in, match ID, user ID. And we're gonna say if any of those are null, so if not match ID, return, and if not user ID, return. Probably put those all in the same line too, but this works. All right, no errors anywhere on the page. It doesn't mean we don't have bugs, but it means that our TypeScript's set up a much better way. I think we should probably do some disconnect. So anytime you have an effect, you probably want to return some type of cleanup function. And if I go back to this code here, this is kind of the code that we were calling. Don't know if this is the thing we actually want to call, but we want to remove all the listeners from the client. So in this case, this client was defined inside a connect. So we might need to pull client out. We can. So pull client out to here, which we can't necessarily do because we have an await on it. So I'm just going to keep it inside the connect for a second. And we are going to just return client from this connect call. So I'll just go ahead and say return client for right now. And we'll just go ahead and say const connect promise is equal to connect. And then if we wanted to get that client, I'm just going to wait on the connect promise like that. And we can't use async await here. So I have to say const disconnect is a function that does all this stuff. I'm going to put async here, and I'm going to call disconnect here. All right. So don't know what this one is. I don't think I need that. Remove all listeners. Does that work? It does. Now we want to stop all the tracks. So I think the video track was stored up there in state, so I could just call stop on it. And then I could probably call close on it as well. And then we want to unpublish both the audio and the... Yeah, let me go ahead and do this. I'm doing this wrong over here. For right now, technically, we could just publish the video. I haven't even dealt with the audio yet. So let's just go ahead and do that. And we'd have to pass back the tracks as well. so that we can get them here. So I'm gonna go ahead and say this and tracks. So we have access to them, and then we're gonna leave. Super confusing, but that's how React works. You know, you have to deal with these effects, and stuff just gets a little bit hard to manage. So you could probably use a custom hook and pull all this logic out, and it could be easier to understand. Well, let's actually make sure that our app still works the way that we think it does. I'm going to delete these users. I don't even know if I need to delete these users every time. I probably do, because it's going to connect them to them. But let's try again. Bob and Jane. And make sure that we get some webcams at least showing up for us. Here we go. Now, the whole cleanup thing I was doing is I want to make sure that if I were to go in here and change something and save, I want to make sure that my React app doesn't crash like it just did. UID conflict. So I think what's happening is, I don't know if my app is disconnecting before it tries to reconnect. Right? So like this thing, I'm calling disconnect here. But if I go back and try to reconnect before I've successfully disconnected, there might be some race condition. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to put a promise up here. I'm going to put a ref actually. I'm going to say like connect ref is equal to use ref. And I'm going to keep track of the, actually I'm going to call it, I don't know. I'll just call it promise ref. I don't know what the best name of this thing is, but I'm going to go ahead and just say promise dot resolve. And this is like a little hack you can do to make Next wait for stuff to finish before it like tries to reconnect or disconnect. So when I do connect here, I'm going to go ahead and say this dot then, and then I'm going to call connect. Oh, actually, I'll say current dot then. Let me do this. I'm going to overwrite the current like this equals to this dot then. Okay, why is this complaining? I'm going to go ahead and just put any here. Like, it's fine. I will say any. So when I connect, I'm going to push that into the current promise so that when I call disconnect, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead and say this is equal to promise current dot then of disconnect. Now what this is going to do is basically don't allow the front end to finish. Oh, did I spell that wrong? Yeah, don't allow the front end to disconnect and to connect like shortly after each other. Like wait for it to all finish. And I'm going to go ahead and wait on that. Okay. Hopefully that kind of fixes the issue with that UID conflict. Because I think what's happening is it's like, it thinks that we have two user IDs connecting with the same thing. And really it should have cleaned up before it tried to like recreate that. So let's try it again. Bob, Jane, join the session. All right. And then again, let's just go ahead and change something and save it. Okay, and it didn't crash that time. So that's what I was doing is I made a ref and just kept on pushing promises onto it. So I kind of queue up these promises so that the disconnect can't happen before the connect finishes, or vice versa. Like wait for the previous thing to happen before you keep on pushing more stuff. And that's going to allow me to like go through and just make changes and like not have to like re-worry about my app crashing. So it's more resilient now. I'm much more happy with this. I might be able to even turn strict mode on and it might work perfectly fine. Yeah, so I guess what we could do is we could add like some type of timer. I guess I'm curious, if I were to refresh this page, we wouldn't know what user ID was stored anymore because the atom would be cleared out. So maybe we should actually like redirect back to the main page if you don't have an atom. So let's just go here and we're just going to keep on adding more logic. I'm going to say if there is no user ID, I'm going to say location. I'll say router.push, and I'm going to go to the main page. probably return. But I need to make sure that the return statement happens before all of this use effect logic, probably. Let's just do that here. I'll say return null. And yeah, so the idea that as I refresh this page, the atom should be cleared. Okay, use router instance. Okay, hold on a second. I've run into this issue before. You can't use this router thing outside of an effect. Like you'd have to do this on the front end. So inside my effect that runs when I mount, I probably should just like return here if there's no user ID, honestly. I'll just do that. I think it should work fine. So now if I actually try to go to this endpoint here and I don't have a user ID set up, it's actually going to just redirect me. Now Bob's going to be sitting here forever by himself. So let's go back to the main page. And so now the app is a little bit more resilient. I'm actually happy with that. But now let's look for a countdown timer. So let's see if there's like a React countdown widget, which I guess there probably is. I mean, there's widgets for everything these days. So let's look at this one. What does this do? Is there a demo? Live demo. Let's go ahead and click that real quick. And let's go ahead and go over to it. Not the best in terms of styling, but hey, it works. Let's just go ahead and import this React countdown. And I'll go ahead and say npm install I React countdown. And I'm going to go ahead and just bring in that countdown timer. So when the thing first loads, what I'm going to do is I'm going to render out a countdown amount. So I'll say like const, I'll say like time left set. I think we just need time left, right? Just use state, and we're going to put some hard-coded logic here. So we could say like date.now, and I will say plus 1000 times 60 times 5. That's 5 minutes worth of time to do a speed dating session. And we could display that somewhere at the top here. Just do it here, I guess. Go ahead and import that. Actually, it looks like Daisy UI React has a countdown thing on it. So maybe we could just use that. Do something higher. Yeah, I'm trying to wonder, like, is there a way to get a callback to know when it's done? On complete, maybe? You can do this by either using an on-complete callback or using the re-render. Okay. So yeah, let's just go ahead and import this one from React countdown. Let's find where we're using it. So here, and we're going to go ahead and say like time left. And let's make sure this thing actually like works. Jane. Actually, before I do that, let's just go ahead and do an on complete and handle countdown completed. Make a function that actually will be invoked when the countdown's done up here. Let's figure out where we should put that. Probably put it here. And let's just go ahead and say router.push. What should we call this? The done page? I don't know. Let's just make a done page real quick, which we can do that here inside of chatting. Actually, inside of pages, I'll just say like done.tsx. And I'll just go ahead and copy the index or something because it'd be easier. Rename this the done page. Delete some of the stuff. And delete all of this, actually. Let's just go ahead and delete everything. Go ahead and delete the form. All this stuff isn't needed. So we'll say speed dating done, and then finally we'll have a button here And we'll just have that button say like, go to waiting room. And then when you click it, we will go ahead and just make that do a React router and go back to waiting. So const router is equal to use router, like so. Import that, and then when you click on done, so unclick, we're going to go ahead and call a function that says router.push, and we want to go to waiting again. So let's verify this works. What I'm actually going to do is I'm going to reduce the time left to like 20 seconds. And I want to make sure that all this stuff works when I connect. So I will go ahead and type in Jane, type in Bob, join the session. We get a 20-second countdown. Got both of these people connected to each other. And then after that time elapses, it's going to kick me off, hopefully, and take me to a done page. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There we go. So that's pretty cool. And it should have disconnected us from Agora. Our webcams are no longer being shared. I think that's some pretty good progress. I mean, I'm going to go ahead and save. I'm glad that the code is a little bit cleaned up, a little bit better. And this one, there's like a little error there, but whatever. Oh, this one's saying it's missing router too, so I got to bring in router. Missing video track too. I'm always scared when I put all these dependencies because like stuff just keeps on re-rendering and re-rendering and re-rendering sometimes. And it's like, I don't know if we want video track. I think I might have an overload going on. Yeah, we don't want, let's just do tracks of 1. We don't want video track here like that. Okay. Now I would probably recommend, let's see if we go back to the waiting room, what happens. It tries to reconnect us with Jane. And it also thinks that we're still connected. So I don't know if we fully, if the on cleanup actually fired. It should have. It should have basically, when we pushed to go to a new route, I would hope that this use effect would have fired the cleanup. So let's just go ahead and put disconnecting. So I'll say console.log running the disconnect function. Like so. And I'm going to go ahead and go back to the main page and we're going to redo this one more time. I know I said one more time every single time, but we're going to keep on redoing this. Bob, Jane. I don't know why one of my things isn't displaying. This is, I think this is kind of the concern I have with just putting a bunch of stuff in your, whatever it's called, running the disconnect function. Running the disconnect function. So if I go back to the waiting room, I don't know why we're getting a UID conflict. I'll have to go look into that a little bit. Because I thought I disconnected. I called client leave. I unpublished my track. I removed all the listeners. Is there anything else that I need to do? Client leave, pass the user ID. I'd probably say if there's no router, then return as well. How about that? Don't know if that made a difference. I was kind of confused why it didn't show 2 of the webcams. So I'll go back and do this again. Okay, that showed up for both. Got Bob over here. I probably should reduce the log level on this stuff. There's so many logs I print out. Kind of hard to debug. Hit match. All right, so the stop video playback called. Did my cleanup call? Did I? Oh, I deleted the console log here. I mean, I think this is being called. I'm just not sure why when I go back to the waiting room. You know, I think the status of waiting should probably change as you're going to different pages. Like when you're actually on the chat room, we should change the status to chatting. when you're on the waiting room, we should probably change your status to waiting. So we should probably address that real quick. I don't think we have a tRPC endpoint for doing that. So I'll go to the user router and I'll add a mutation called like change status, set status, and I could say user ID, and I could say status. And we want to basically update the speed date user. So I'll say, oops, say dot update. And then we want to update where the user ID is that. And then for data, we want to set the status equal to input.status, like so. Okay, so now we can actually call this from the front end, and every time we go to the waiting page, we can set them to be waiting. Let's just go ahead and const set status mutation is equal to tRPC.use mutation users set status, like so. And then when we hit this page for the first time, so on mount, we'll probably say use effect. And just go ahead and call set status mutation, mutate, and I'm going to go ahead and pass in user ID and status of waiting. Probably do that too. Probably do user ID. I think it should be set by this time. I mean, like if it's not set, we could probably say like if not set, return. I don't know, sometimes I add like additional checks just because I'm worried about stuff. But when this page first loads, we're going to set the status to waiting. And then if we go to the match ID, we're going to go ahead and change the status to chatting. Like that. All right, so let's make sure this works. I'm going to go ahead, clear this out again. Go back to the main page. So that'll recreate our users, Jane, Bob. But before I do that, let's refresh. We should see Jane and she should be waiting. And then I'm going to go ahead and create Bob. I'm going to connect those two. Uh-oh. I got an infinite loop going. Telling you, React is like not a good, not an intuitive library. It just really isn't. There's just so much confusion going on here. So I was at the waiting page and I think like, why is this complaining? Set status mutation. It's a hook that's probably continuously returning itself over and over again. Like I bet you it would work fine if I didn't do this. If I did user ID, is this okay? Yeah, I don't know. If I didn't do that stuff in the effect, like I bet you this will work perfectly fine, because I don't know how this hook works. Like, does it return a new reference every single time? It probably does, which means you can't put this in a dependency use effect because it's just going to keep on refetching over and over again. So that's my hunch. This app is just broken now. It used up all the memory on my machine probably. Okay, this thing is just like, I wish there's a way to close this tab. Close the tab, it's stuck. Anyway, so let's just do this over here, Bob. And I'll go ahead and go over here. Make sure this thing isn't doing like an infinite fetch like it was before. And then I'll do Jane. Join that. Those two should connect. Bob and Jane should be connected. And then if I go and look at the users, we have chatting. So now I should be able to like load up more users. Rick. And then, I don't know, do something quick before it leaves. So now Rick and ASDF should be connected while these two are done. Awesome. So yeah, I think this is working good. And now they're stuck on chatting, and until they go back to the waiting room. They went back to the waiting room. And if I refresh the page, I'm not sure who it tried to connect them to. UID conflict. I have to look that one up. I'm not really sure why I'm getting a UID conflict there. But yeah, I mean, it's working better than it was before. And I'm gonna go ahead and commit. We got some good progress, I think. Git commit. Adding a done page that a user can go back to the waiting room. And I'll close all this. So I think there's a couple things that we could probably try to address. Let's go ahead and go to the done route here. And remember if we talked in the earlier where we said that we should be able to like or dislike a person? Maybe we can work on this functionality. So let's go ahead and go to our application, and we want to basically allow the user when they're on the done page to like or dislike the person who they were talking to, okay? And kind of keep track of that. And if both people like each other, then we should probably show the contact information for the other person. And like this contact info isn't going to be like super obscured or hide away from the front end. Like if someone's smart enough, they can go look at the API and get the information they want for right now. But let's just go ahead and on the done, we're going to go ahead and say waiting for feedback. Okay. And we're going to have two buttons. You know, let's say please rate your session. And then we're going to have two buttons that says like or dislike. Like so. I'll put a like here and I'll put a dislike here. And when you click on those buttons, like we don't actually need to really navigate to anywhere yet. Let's make sure those things display, and we're going to go ahead and just kind of style them. So I believe we can put color as, we'll do success, and then color of dislike would be error, because I believe that'll be red and blue, or red and green. Awesome. Now let's go ahead and wrap those. So I'll say grid. I'm sorry. So I'm going to say flex, and then I'm going to say wrap those two things in a flex box so that they're side by side. And then we can also gap for them, so there's some spacing between them. And let me zoom in just a little bit. I think I'm zoomed out. So the idea is like when you like the person or dislike the person, we need to keep track of that on the match model. So let's go to Prisma. And let's go to that match model, which is here. And we want to keep track of the rating, I guess. So I could say source user feedback. Could be a string, I guess. And then we could also do sync user feedback. And whenever you change the model, remember you have to go and run a Prisma migrate. So I'm going to go ahead and run a npx Prisma migrate dev. I'm going to go back and add question marks. I'm going to make those optional because we don't want to set those until like the speed dating thing has been finished. So let's make those optional. Rerun. It's going to ask us, I'll say adding feedback to match. And now when that's done running, remember to restart your next server and restart your Prisma Studio so that we can get the latest information from that. All right, so the idea is when you click on like or dislike, we need to update that. So we don't have an endpoint yet, so I'm going to go to the matches router, and we're going to make a new mutation so you can actually like mutate and keep track of the feedback. So I'm going to say post feedback, and that's going to take in an object like so. Let me go ahead and do that. And inside object, we're going to say input zeta object, and we want to pass in a match ID, which is a string, and then probably the source. Actually, I'll just say user ID. So the user ID who's giving feedback, and then also say status, which I need to make those actually like Zod objects here. So let's do that. And I have some errors. Where are these errors coming from? Input, Zod object here. I need to delete that one. And I probably need a resolve method here, which is going to take in a input, a context, and then also call a function, like so. All right. So the idea is like the user is going to post feedback. They're going to say whether they liked or disliked. And we're just going to keep track of that. So I'm going to go ahead and say context.prisma.match.update. And we want to update where the match ID is equal to input.match ID, like so. And then the data that we want to update, we're going to go ahead and just paste status. Actually, so let's look at the schema. Source user feedback and sync user feedback. So we need to determine, is the user who is posting the feedback, are they the source or the sync user? So I'm going to go ahead and say const is sync user equals to. And we actually might need to fetch first. So I'm kind of jumping around, but first thing we want to do is fetch the match from the database. So let's go ahead and do a find unique where the input is the match ID. And then once we got the match, I'm going to say const is sync user is equal to match.syncuser.id. Make sure you wait and put async in front of this or you can't actually do this stuff. So I'm going to do match, I'm going to do sync user ID, and I'm going to check if the user who's trying to post the feedback, if they're equal to the sync user, then we're going to set this to true, and we're going to use this just so we can do like a ternary operator. And then we're going to set, if the sync user is true, then we want to modify the data of sync user feedback, I believe. So I'll just go ahead and paste that in here. And then otherwise, let's paste in the other one. Like so. And then we're going to say status, or input.status. All right, so basically determine if the user posting the feedback is the sync user or the source user. And then we're going to update the status for them depending on who made the request. Let's go ahead and wait on that. And then that's about it. We should be able to call this from the front end now. And when you click on one of these buttons, we can kind of call a function here. So I'm going to go ahead and make a function called, actually, I forget we're using tRPC. So we have to actually bring in the post feedback mutation. And that's going to be tRPC dot use mutation, and then we're going to call the matches post feedback here, and we want to make sure that we call the correct method depending on what we want. So let's just make a method here called post feedback, and then I'll say status just to keep it consistent with our backend, and we're going to do post feedback mutation mutate async, I guess we could do. And I will pass in that status like this. We also probably need to pass in the user ID and then the match ID. Which we don't have user ID and match ID, so how do we get that? Well, we go to the match ID here. I believe we're using Jotai to bring in the user ID, which is, where's that at? Here. Let's just go ahead and bring that in because we want to keep track of who we are as a user. So I'll import that one and I'll import this one. And then the match ID, how do we get that? Well, we should probably actually put the done page as a sub route of chatting. Or we could put the match ID inside a Jotai as well. I don't know what the best approach is, but let's just go ahead is when this page loads, when you first mount this page, we're going to go ahead and post the match ID. So I'm going to go match ID here, and we're going to go ahead and make sure that this is defined like so. And then we're going to do an effect to basically store that in another atom. And one thing you'll notice, I like to do the simplest thing first and make sure it works. So I'm just going to go ahead and put the atom on the match ID page. And I'll say match ID atom is equal to an atom of an empty string. And then over here, we can actually say const match ID global set match ID global is equal to use atom, and then pass in the atom here. So that will allow us to store this like so, to get it from the React router here, and I'm going to store it in a atom so we can kind of access it later on. Go ahead and make sure I pass in both of these here. And then we don't need this, the first element of that array, so I'm going to delete it. So now after you've been in a match with someone and like everything's loaded, we're storing the match ID somewhere so that we can further get it in the done page. So let's just go ahead and again, we'll say use atom of const match ID is equal to use atom. And then I will pass in the match ID atom here, which it's not auto importing for some reason. Here we go. You got it. And now what we could do is we can use all three of those, and we're going to post that status to the user ID and the match ID, and then we can await on this, and we can also async await this. And we probably want to hide these buttons once we've done that. So I'm kind of wondering what the best approach forward to do that is, and I'm just going to go ahead and make another state variable called like feedback sent. Set feedback sent. And we're going to go ahead and just use a state variable here, which is going to be false. And when you've done this successfully, I'm going to set it to true. And then we don't want to show the buttons unless the feedback has not been sent yet. I'll just go ahead and do this. And we might need to wrap this in a fragment down here so that we can actually dynamically show them or not. So when you click on either like or dislike, we have to call this post feedback button. I'll do this. Call a function, and then I'll just go ahead and paste it like or dislike. So this one will be dislike. This page has like two different states to it. It's either we have the feedback sent or we don't. So I'm going to go ahead and paste this as well, like so, and then I'm going to add back that go to waiting room button. Like so. I think I deleted the router on accident, so I'm going to go ahead and bring that back. So const use router. Bring that in from next. All right, so this should work fine. Now that I think about it, we need to wait for the other person to like give their feedback too. So I kind of wonder if we should have an interval going and just keep on checking every so often to see if they've provided their feedback. And we actually do that on the match page, I believe. I think there's an interval that we do. Or maybe it's on the waiting page, there's an interval. So I'm going to go ahead and copy some of this logic here, and I'm going to put it inside the done page. And I'm going to go ahead and just do that same query. There's a query called get match query, I believe. If I can find it. Here we go. In fact, now that I think about it, maybe we need to find this one. We need to get the match by the match ID, not do this one. All right, so we have a match query. I'm gonna go ahead and call it and make sure we get some data back, like so. In fact, I think I copied the wrong thing. Let's go to waiting. There should be an interval somewhere, which I put it here. So let's go ahead and call this one. I'm gonna delete this stuff. I think I copied the wrong stuff. So basically, we're gonna keep on refetching the match from the backend, and at some point, like the other user should have either liked or disliked you, hopefully. And once they've liked you, we are going to basically have that data here inside the match query. So using that, I'm going to go ahead and do a derived here. I'm just going to say const like const both feedbacks provided. Kind of verbose as a name, but it works. And we're going to check if the sync user feedback is defined to true. Or I guess we called it like. And then also we want to check that the source user feedback is like as well. So if both people have liked it, then we want to show some type of state. Otherwise we show a different state. And this might get even more complicated because the fact that I'm going to say both liked is going to be this one, and this one's just going to be make sure they're both defined. Okay, because they could be undefined potentially. Okay, so we're going to get a little bit convoluted in terms of showing and hiding different states. But I'm going to say if both feedback has been provided and both liked it, then let's just go ahead and show a div that has something. We probably want their contact info. And then the other approach is if both have provided and they haven't both liked, then we're going to show something else, which is probably go to the waiting room. In fact, go to the waiting room needs to show every single time. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this. It'll make it a little bit easier. So if both have liked, then what we're going to do is we're going to show the contact info for the match. So I'm going to say const contact info is equal to, and then we also need to check if we are the sync user. Is sync user is equal to match query dot data dot sync user ID. If that is equal to our current user ID, then we know we're the sync user. And then we're going to check over the sync user. Then we need to grab the sync user dot contact info. Oops. Like so. Otherwise, we're going to grab the source. In fact, I think I have this backwards. If we are the sync user, then grab the source user. Otherwise, grab the sync user. All right, so super confusing. I need to kind of go through all this and rethink some of the logic, but I think this works for the most part, and we're going to go ahead and show that contact info if both people liked the other person, okay? And then I'm going to go ahead and put this here if the feedback is not sent. Actually, I'm going to say if, wait, why did I say fallback? That's definitely not it. That's not what I want to call it. I want to call it feedback. Feedback sent. I don't know why I called it fallback. So if the feedback has been sent and both people have provided their feedback, I'm going to put a div that's just waiting for other user to give like or dislike. That's it. So I'm not 100% happy with how this goes looking. I need to come back and refactor it. I know I keep saying that, but let us go ahead and get rid of some errors. So I'll go ahead and type this as string. And then down here, when they click like or dislike, we're going to post that string as like or dislike. And that should save it to the match. We should continuously query the match every 5 seconds. And then at some point, we'll get back the match data and it'll have the feedbacks on them. So yeah, let's just try this out. We'll probably run into some errors, let's be honest. But we have one page, and I'll go ahead and open another one. And again, we'll say Jane, I'll type in some random letters, and then I'll say Bob, type in some random letters. And I forgot that I probably need to clear my database, so let's go ahead and go back. The developer experience so far with this app I'm building, I need to think about a better way to like do some of the stuff. But all right, so that should be chatting with Bob and Jane, and these things should show up. And then we should go to a page that'll show any type of like feedback and stuff. Let me make sure I have like my proper network tab set up. All right, so please rate the other person. I'm going to go to the match, which I believe I called it. I don't remember what the match ID is. There should only be one. But if you look at this, I don't know if I can drag this down. My head might be blocking some of this. Let me go ahead and push this to the right so you can see it. So we got source user feedback and sync user feedback. And if I refresh this, it should stay null. And so I'm going to go ahead and say, I liked this person, waiting for the other user to give feedback. Refresh this. We have like here. And then which one should we do, like or dislike? If we do dislike, we should see a button that says go to the waiting page, and that's it. If we do like, we should see the contact information for the other person. So I'm gonna click like, and after about 5 seconds or less, hoping the page should refresh, and we see their contact info. And again, I just typed in some random information here, but it actually works. That's pretty cool. And if I click go to waiting room, what is it going to do? It shouldn't connect me with anybody. I think there's a little bug. So like, I think the waiting room is going to check to see if there's a match that has your user ID in it. But we've already done this one, right? It's already done. So we shouldn't redirect them to this match. So I might have to change the query a little bit. So where I do matches, I think users, and I do like a get match or something, I'm getting any match that has sync user ID, which is not what we want. We don't want anything that has a status of, I forget what we called it. It's a status of running. And I think this is how find first not where. Oh, I need to put it in the where clause. I'll go ahead and do this. So does that make sense? So basically get the match that's not already running. Which also doesn't make sense because I believe when we create the match, oh, we put it as status as waiting. No, that's the speed dating user match. Status of waiting, I think we should put it. So that might make more sense. So when we first create the match, status is waiting. When both people join, we need to somehow switch the status to running for both of these matches. I don't think we do that in the front end. So what we probably need to do is when the match thing loads, we might need to do another mutation to basically set the status of the, like this one I believe is setting the status of the user to chatting. But we should probably do another one that says matches set status, set matches status mutation. And we probably want to mutate that as well. So let's go ahead and go to the backend. We have the matches router, and I'm going to go ahead and go to my mutation. And I'm going to go ahead and make another one called set status. Just going to take it a match ID and a status. And we're just going to go ahead and do an update. So I'm going to go ahead and update the match. I'm going to set the status to, we could make this chatting. I think I call it running somewhere else, so I probably should remove anywhere I have running. I'm going to change that from running the chatting. And in here, I'm going to call this to waiting. So when we first create a match, let's just put it as waiting. And yeah, we'll need to make another migration script for that. Okay, so we were trying to basically add a ability to change the status to chatting so that we don't ever get it again when we fetch it. So let's go back to the match endpoint or the match page. And I'm going to go ahead and say match ID status of chatting as well. And I'll probably just disregard this eslint error for right now. Let's make sure this actually works. I think it should. I don't see why I wouldn't. Let's go back and let's just start fresh again. So let's delete some of these things. Go to the main page for both of these users. I'll do Bob, and his info will be like 123 444 444 2222, something like that. And then Jane, same thing. I'll just put a phone number. And when they connect, I should probably reduce this from 20 seconds to something more like, uh-oh. I think I might have broke something. I don't know what I would have broke, but let's go ahead and let's just clear it out again. Let's just go back to the main page, go to speed users, delete both, go to match, and I'm going to go ahead and Yeah, I think there's actually a bug with my logic. So like when the first person goes to the match page, it's going to update this to chatting, but then we're still waiting for the other person to be connected as well. But their query is not going to find anything that's chatting, right? Because remember we added that like that not clause, which I don't think it was here. I think it was like over here. So we can't do this. Instead, what we need to do, or maybe we can keep it as get match that's not in status of chatting. But when we join it, when we set the status, maybe we need to keep track of who's joined. Instead of just changing it straight to chatting, like maybe we need to say join match. Keep track of who's actually joined with a user ID or something. And then if both people have joined that match, then we can change the status to chatting. So yeah, I don't know, it's getting a little bit convoluted, but do the easiest thing first and come back and refactor is my motto. So let's just go ahead and keep track of sync user joined is a Boolean. And then we can also do source user joined is a Boolean, and I'll put that down here. Does it need to be capital B? Yeah, okay. So when both people have joined, we're going to change the status to chatting. Inside of here, again, we're going to do like is source user or is sync user. I think we do that like multiple places. So let's just go ahead and kind of copy this logic out. I'm going to get the match here. So await context Prisma match dot find unique, where the ID is equal to the match ID. And that should give us the match. And then we're going to say if match dot, let's see. First of all, what we need to do is we have to update it. So let's get this, let's just figure out if the person making the request is the sync user. Input user ID is equal to match dot sync user ID. Okay, so we'll know if it's a sync user or a source user. And we're going to go ahead and update the current match object in the database, depending on if you're a sync user or not. So I'm going to go ahead and say like, if it's sync user, I'll say sync user joined. I think is what I called it, sync user joined. Otherwise, we'll say source user joined. And then we're going to set that to true. And we could probably default this to false, because it's a Boolean, so let's just default it to false. And then we'll keep track of the updated match. And then we want to check if both, so if both the sync user joined, which we don't have IntelliSense for because we haven't like reran the migration. So let's rerun the migration real quick, and I'll say adding joined booleans to match. There we go. Go ahead and restart that. Go ahead and restart this as well. And now what we're going to do is we're going to basically check if both of these people, if the updated match sync user joined and updated match source user joined, we're going to go ahead and update this whole match again and put the status as chatting. So in my head, this seems like this might be the best approach forward, and we'll have to find out if this is actually going to work or not. So let's go ahead and go back to this, because I don't think this thing needs to take in a status anymore. It probably needs a user ID, which is why we're getting the errors here. And this one is actually renamed to join match. Join match mutation. All right, so let's go back to our little app, make sure we don't have any users set up. And moment of truth, I'm going to change the 20. I think we do like a 20 somewhere. I'm just going to do 10 seconds, so we're not sitting here waiting for 20 seconds every time. And I'm going to go ahead and do Bob. His number is 555. Click join, and then I'll do Jane. She is 777. And when they both join, let's see if this works. So they're both in the same chat room. if we look at the actual match itself, it says they both joined. Join. This is status of chatting. And now they're both done. If I go ahead and like one, and then I'm going to dislike the other because we haven't done that use case yet. Let's see what happens. All right, so now one is liked, one is disliked, and we are only showing go to the waiting room. So at this point, if I go ahead and click go to the waiting room, what's going to happen? I don't know. Let's see. Go to the waiting room. It's saying chatting with Jane again. For some reason. And I'm not really sure why it did that, because like it shouldn't have found that user. Let's go ahead and check this out real quick. So what does this actually do? So this is going to set the status mutation of the user to waiting. And then I'm going to, what is this doing? Find the user to match with. So the bug we're trying to figure out is like, I was at the done screen. I'm set to chatting. My match was set to chatting. I clicked go to waiting room, and then instantly it matched me with something, which isn't what we want. And I think it's because I'm using React Query, which this has bit me in the butt multiple times, where if you don't tell the cache to not like keep track of stuff, it's going to use your cache and then give you back data that's not the correct thing that you want. So I'm going to go ahead and just pass all this stuff in because I don't want it to basically refetch with the same old match ID, right? So React Query has a cache under the hood. And since I already did this, this match ID is stored, but we don't want to have it stored. We want to fetch a brand new one and wait for it. Find user, again, like, why do we do find user here? So we call find user.data, it match and find match. Yeah, I think it'd be better to like, I'm second guessing my thoughts of even using React Query on this project, because a lot of the stuff you don't want cached. Like this is a really dynamic app, and I might need to go and set the default cache behavior to be off and then add in the caching behavior if I really want it. Because I think it's going to cause a lot of bugs in the future if I don't do that. But let's try it again. Let's delete the users. I'll do Jane 555, and then I'll do Bob 111. We are connected with each other. We should be able to do our webcams and talk a little bit. Haven't done the microphone implementation yet, so we'll have to do that soon. But now we're both done with our session, and we can rate it. So I'll say like, and then I'll say like. Wait about 5 seconds. I could probably reduce that wait time a little bit. And now we can see their contact info. So if I'm Bob or whoever I am here and I go to the waiting room, I should be waiting. Just wait for a new user. And this looks like it's working pretty well. And again, if I go ahead and go back to this one, we just got reconnected together. And I'm going to dislike, and then I'm going to dislike and see what happens. Cool. So I'll add in one more user, and I just want to see what happens if I add in like Sally. Go ahead and join a session. So now we have 3 people who could potentially match up. And I think it's just a first come, first serve right now. So if I go ahead, it's going to connect Jane with Sally, I thought. Yeah, here we go. We're connected together. So the timer is a little bit off. Maybe we could fix that. And when we first create the match, we should probably put an expiration time on it. So the match could be like a number, expires or ends on, and then that could be like a number. Or integer, maybe. What do we call it in Prisma? An int. Don't know if it needs to be an int or a float. I think an int will work fine. But when we create the match, so let's go to users, and I think there's one called like create match or something. Find match. This is the thing creating the match, which is not what we want. We want to, let me go back to Prisma. I'm going to make this optional, and I'm going to default it to 0 actually. But when we connect two people together, I think that's when we actually want to like set the matches updating, and then probably ends on should be some type of like date.now plus I'll do 20 seconds times 1000. And this is complaining because again, I haven't ran the Prisma migrate. So I'll say migrate here. And then I'll say adding ends on to match model. Here we go. Restart my server, restart my studio. And now we actually want the ends on that comes from the match to be that countdown. So let's find that countdown timer. And let's find like where we're setting that time. So time left comes from here. This actually needs to come from somewhere else. This needs to come from the match. So I'm going to do match query. I'll say const time left is equal to match query data dot time or ends on. How about that? And this could be potentially undefined maybe. We'll have to figure out. But that should be a more accurate representation since both users need to end on the same time. Let's give that a shot. I'm going to go ahead and go back to the main page here and start fresh. Although I don't think we need to do a fresh start anymore because I think we have the logic in place to like not have it crash. Hopefully. Okay. So it instantly just crashed. And what I want to do is I want to say maybe the countdown, which we do here, I don't want to render that unless data or match query dot data is defined. Like if this thing is not set yet, then we don't want to render this out. And then if it is set, you know, just go ahead and put it here. Like so, and then I'm going to get rid of that derived variable here. Let's try it again. We both liked each other. Okay, it's going to crash. Here's my migrate. Option failed because depends on one or more records that were required but not found. Record to update not found. Yeah, I'm not sure what happened there. Definitely a bug probably in the system. Let's just go ahead and start again. I'll do a Bob, do a Jane. And we are connected. And at some point, it should have switched the match over to be like ends on of a real date. But it's not doing that for some reason. It's still status awaiting. I guess I'm kind of confused why that's happening. Because if you go to where we actually like match up the users, which I guess is where do we do that? Is it here? So if they both joined, if one user is joined and the other user has joined, we're going to go ahead and set ends on to this date time. And for some reason, it's still set as 0. And the status is still waiting. So I kind of wonder, like, why did this thing not get reached? You know what I mean? So, I mean, I'll try it again. Maybe I did something too fast and there's like a race condition. But I'm going to go ahead and go back and just try this one more time and just refresh. Do a hard refresh on both pages. Bob, Jane. go to the match actually. I'm going to refresh this and make sure that we get a match when they both connect together. Yeah, this is kind of weird. It's not sync user joined is true, source user joined is true. My backend must be crashing. Let's go ahead and go to the backend. Prisma match update invocation, inconsistent column data, conversion failed. Okay, I'm putting some data that's way too big inside of that. So I think what I need to put there is probably a big int now. That's even a valid data type. So I'll go ahead and just run a migration again. And I'll say change, oops, I do. Change to big int. All right. Try that out. All right, let's do this. Bob and Jane, go ahead and connect with each other. Cannot mix big int and other types. Use explicit conversions. Okay. This is turning out to be a lot more difficult. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to change this to a string. So, and I'm going to go ahead and just store the string of when this thing should end. And then I can do the conversion in the front end if I want to. Is that the best approach? I don't know. But let's just go ahead and do that. Go ahead and run another migration, change ends on to string. Delete those records. Make sure I go back to the main page, and I'm going to go to the code and make sure I can handle this change, because I believe inside of the match itself, we have the countdown. And I think we have like the match query.data, which we're using for the countdown everywhere. Here, this is a string, but really we should probably, I don't know if this thing needs to be a data or string. It could be a string, I think. So let's just try this as is. I think we do have an issue here where this needs to be an actual like string interpolation. And that'll fix that issue. Let's try it again. Let's just go Bob and Jane. And all we're shooting for is just having a clock pop up with how much time is left. NA. So we're making progress, but we're not there yet. I think let's look at the Prisma Studio and see what data is actually stored on match. And we do get a string here. That's good. But I think on the front end, if you don't pass in a numeric, I'm guessing it treats it as like a date string object. I could say parse int here. That might make it work better. Let's try this. Let's try this again. All right, there. Now their clocks are synced up. They're both about at the same time, 13:13. And they should both end around the same time too. So that's the whole thing I was trying to implement, is I want these clocks to be in sync. And the only way to do that is if you store the end time in the database. And now when they both finish, they should go to the like page. I'll say like on this one, like on this one. There we go. We can see their contact info. Now I will say, I think there's a little bug with like the match query not updating all the way. I don't know if we maybe don't want to cache stuff on this as well. Refetch on window focus. When we first went to this page, join match mutation. Yeah, so like we need to like refetch the match query after doing this, just in case, like, you have to have two people join at the same time before you can actually get the actual real match in on data. So let's try it again. I'm gonna click like over here. Don't know why it failed that time. All right, there we go. Both sessions have ended, and I'm gonna go ahead and say like on one, like on the next one. And after about 5 seconds, I should probably reduce that 5 seconds to something lower, but Anyway, let's go to the waiting room, and I'm going to go ahead and go to the waiting room and make sure that this countdown works like it did last time, because we were running into some issues with the countdown timer not. Yeah, it's like you have to like refocus the page for it to work. So there's a little bug with that, and I'm not really happy about, but or we can try to figure it out. Honestly, I think what we could do is also put this on an interval as well. Seems kind of hacky. There's like a lot of race conditions going on because you have like users, you don't know when they're going to join. Maybe we could add another page and like make this less race conditiony, but let's just go ahead and try to get this working. So like we could do another interval here, and we're just going to fetch the match data on an interval so that we can get the updated timer like so. And I'm going to go ahead and just call match query refetch on, let's say a 1 second timer. And when that thing actually comes back, we should probably clear the interval. So I'm going to say like, yeah, this is only going to load once, it clears the interval. I could say if this is defined, then just like clear the interval. Will that be easier? Will that make sense? This 20 seconds is killing me. I need to reduce that. All right, so let's like on one of them. Let's like on the next one. And then we should get the waiting room button. Let's go ahead and go to the waiting room. Let's go back to the waiting room. It should reconnect us together. And since we're on an interval, we should get the latest time. And then the interval stops firing because we got the latest time. Cool. I think this actually works pretty good. I think we're kind of close to wrapping up this prototype. We just need to add audio to the video, right? So that the users can kind of interact with each other, which probably isn't too hard. I mean, if we just go to the matches ID and we find where we register the create microphone and audio tracks, we just need to publish both of these. So I'm going to publish both tracks, and I'm going to go ahead and post the audio track. So I'm going to say set audio track, and that's going to be the first one. And then we probably need some state to keep track of that. So I'm going to say audio track, set audio track. Local audio track, I think is what we want. In fact, I guess we don't really care about our microphone. Like we don't need to keep track of our microphone. We just need to keep track of the user's microphone, right? So maybe I don't even need to keep track of our microphone unless you wanted to add like some muting functionality, but we're probably not going to do that in this video. But we get the tracks back. Let's see. So I think here's where we do it. So when you subscribe, if the media type is audio, I believe, is another media type you can have access to, then we should probably set other user audio. I want to keep track of the other user audio. Where's that set? So set other user. I'll go ahead and say other user audio. Set other user audio. And then we should probably like play it. I mean, I guess we could just say other user dot audio track dot play. Like so. Let's see what happens if we do this. This might just cause a lot of bugs. But then we also want to like probably clean up and unplay that. In fact, I'll just go ahead and return the well, we have both tracks, so let's just go ahead and stop the first one too. So that'll be the audio track. Let's stop those and close them. In fact, yeah, I don't know why I even have to keep track of the audio. Let's just go ahead and delete that one. We don't need that for right now. Let's see if this works. Because you just want to be able to hear the other person. And I think if we do this correctly, we should be able to hear their microphone. Testing. Testing. Hey, how's it going? Testing. All right, so you can probably hear that. Hello, what's going on? And I want to make sure that this goes away when the round is over. There we go. So that's how you kind of add the audio. It's pretty straightforward. Like whenever you get that audio track, you just play the audio. And if you want to make it more robust, you can kind of like pull that out to a state variable so you can pause it and mute it and stuff like that. But yeah, overall, we got a cool little speed dating app prototype that we built using the Agora API and Prisma and the T3 stack. So there's a lot more I could probably add onto this and kind of polish it up, but I think this is a really good prototype that we can kind of take to the next level if you want to. Just wanted to share with you how you could build this, and I hope you guys learned something from watching this. Like always, feel free to join my Discord if you want to ask me questions or kind of be part of a community who's also trying to learn how to code. I've got a lot of people there who are willing to help find and fix your bugs if you're stuck. And yeah, feel free to give me a like, subscribe, leave a comment, and have a good day and happy coding.